Hello, Mr. Lee. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hello. How are you?
I'm fine.
I'm not sure if now is a good time, but do you all other competitors want to discuss which legislation we want to have be the top two, even though it doesn't matter as much as previous rounds?
Yeah, I mean, is everybody here?
I don't think all the competitors are here yet.
I think we're missing 5 people, yeah.
Okay, we can wait.
I believe you're missing 2 students.
This is going to be interesting.
Okay, is that everyone then? I think we had 2 more people.
Count 14 with entry in their name in the participant window.
So we're 1 short then, I think, right? I think there's a judge that's talking, but we can't hear you. Your mic is unmuted, but we're just not getting any sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. This is a question to the party. Can the students change their name so it just says Senator or SEN period in the last name? So it's just so much easier to track when everybody's on the screen.
Yeah, it's good by me.
They have to be given permission from Tab in order to do that. So it might take a little bit before that happens.
Gotcha.
Apologies,
Thank
I
you.
wasn't aware of that. Thank you for letting us know.
I'm I'm going to give everyone permission to rename themselves. So you should now all have that ability. If you can just give me a thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Question. I think that's our 15th competitor.
A quick question. For the three presiding officers in the room, would you like us to signify our name in a different way to keep things straight? Maybe PO in our last name, or just keep it as Senator?
I have no preference. Do the other judges have any preferences on that?
I'll go with PO.
All right, so now that everyone's here, what did y'all have in mind for the docket? I can tell you what I'm thinking if no one else has anything.
Personally, I was thinking NIMBY and then the promote demilitarization legislation.
Yeah, I like that too.
I'd like to do it in order because we have 4 hours. We'd have time to go through all of them. I mean, it'd make no sense to shuffle the order around.
I believe the rules do say that everyone can only give 2 speeches.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm sorry. But I personally like the housing bill. If no one does, that's fine. Or, I'm sorry, broadband bill.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I like broadband a lot.
Yeah.
I like, to be honest, I like NIMBY the least, but also I think if we can also do all 3 bills if people are willing to.
So NIMBY and Baby are definitely ones that I'd like to see on the docket. What do you guys think?
Personally, I'd prefer militarization and then NIMBY.
Yeah, like I think those are the 2 best bills.
Okay.
I guess we're all
Can we start with NIMBY though? I prefer that.
Yeah, I like that order.
Okay.
So 2 first. Okay, it seems that there's not much. Oh, so wait, so so is it that more people are good with NIMBY and we're deciding between broadband and police? Is that the?
I don't know if there's consensus on NIMBY yet.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of NIMBY.
Neither am I.
Oh, right. Okay.
But again, I think if there's especially since it's like a limit of 2, if we work it out ahead of time, we can easily have 3 bills of debate and you just speak on 2.
3 bills with 12 people per chamber isn't preferable. Like if I have to switch bills, I would do that. Like
The other thing, you get splits first and then see what they look like and then decide which bills you want to do.
Yeah, because if we
That's a good
don't have
idea.
it split, it would make no sense to put a bill before another. So
Also, do we want to start off by taking splits for NIMBY? All right, so all those who want to speak on off, just raise a placard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, it's quite a bit. All those on neg. 1, 2. Okay, that's a little bit problematic. So I'll just write the split in the chat.
I can try to flip neg.
Okay. And then the demilitarization bill, all those on AF. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 again.
I can flip neg for that one.
Okay, cool. So that's 7. And then all those on neg. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's 7 to 5. That's not as bad.
That's a pretty good split, actually. Yeah.
Wait, were there more negation speakers on NIMBY? Or
I think Senator Jay just said he could flip, so at best it would be like 8.
I can try to flip. I'll see if I find anything. But
Can we see the broadband split as well?
Yeah, let's get the broadband split.
Okay.
Who's on AF for that one?
1, 2.
Oh.
I'll flip neg. That's all.
I'm counting
Yeah,
7. Okay.
I can flip 2. I have
That was
neg
7.
prep.
there's no reason to flip neg though, because that looks pretty even. There's
That was
not
7, yeah.
That was 7.
Yeah.
So I think we should do broadband if it's one of the only balanced ways.
Well, I think broadband and militarization were significantly more balanced than NIMBY. I feel like we should just do those 2, even if.
So
Yeah.
I also
let's
like
start-
also one more thing. I like cut out when we voted for NIMBY. I'm also on half for NIMBY.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like doing NIMBY might be problematic.
All right, so I think we should start with broadband because it's more even. And that means if people need to flip for demilitarization, they can. So I think that'll even everything out. What do you guys think though? I'm not.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay,
What was the broadband split again?
It was 7-6, I think.
Yep.
Or something like that.
7, okay, because I know that the militarization was 7-5. I don't know. I feel like those are pretty similar.
They're like, it's like the same. I mean,
It's
yeah.
not, it's actually 9-2 for NIMBY though, because one person didn't put up their app, so it's very
Yeah.
like unbalanced.
Yeah, like
If militarization and the broadband are the similar splits, then I would prefer militarization first.
I would too.
Yeah, I'm on that same page.
so would I. So would I.
But if it's the same, I mean, I prefer broadband because it does look a lot more even. We did have a more even split. Even if it's down to 1 people, it's just not great to default on, 2.
I agree. I don't have like a preference for the order. I really don't mind, but Senator Martinez is right. The split was off by 2 on that one.
Can I just propose, if we have a consensus on the bills themselves, then we just switch the orders around and propose 2 dockets? Because like, if we have a consensus on the bills, that's like the big thing we need to deal with.
Yeah, agreed.
I'll propose everyone who wants to do broadband first, I'll propose that docket, and then everyone else who wants the reverse order, then we'll vote and we'll see how it turns out.
I can propose that. That's fine. Yeah, no worries.
Does anyone intend to speak on NIMBY, or are we just trying to have 2 full debates on militarization and broadband?
I'd like to speak on NIMBY if possible.
I would also be good with speaking on NIMBY.
I like.
All right.
I thought about that. Like, this is just my opinion because I like NIMBY, but I don't think that that's going to be conducive to anything.
I mean, if some people prefer to speak on NIMBY and not broadband, then I don't see why we can't have like some people speak on broadband and some people speak on NIMBY.
Right. So
If
say we
everyone-
Yeah, to me that seems preferable.
No. Okay. So
I don't
agree.
think it's problematic as long as no one's planning on like crystalling on NIMBY, because if there's like 3 speakers, then that's not going to be
It's hard,
hard.
because
Yeah.
it makes it really hard to predict, like, you know what I mean? Like how many people are going to speak on which
number
one.
of people also want to speak on that one, you would have to divide it out of all of them too. So it'd be like 9 speakers per bill for all 3 bills or something. So if that's what you'll want to do, then.
Okay, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to send what I think the 2 dockets we're considering are, just so everyone knows what we're saying. Also for the judges, perhaps. Also, this is a very random question. Does anyone know if there's an award ceremony we have to be at? I'm just trying to make sure my schedule is patterned out.
That's a very good question, and I will try to get information for you. I know the TOC has a broadcast planned for tomorrow, but I do not know full details yet about that. I just knew to show up here right now, and that's kind of the. But I'll find out by the end of the final round what we're going to do with that.
All right, thank you.
And with that being said, the time is now exactly noon Eastern time, and so we are ready to begin the final round of the 2021 Tournament of Champions in Congressional Debate. Welcome to everybody who is here present in chamber as well as watching the live stream. This has been the most unique of congressional debate TOCs. Last year, you were the group that started the virtual revolution. And really, last year, we were the test case for could congressional debate exist in an online world. This year, not only have we shown that the world of Congress can exist, we've seen how it can thrive. With 178 total entries, far and away the largest TOC Congress ever at the beginning of competition on Saturday morning. The first TOC quarterfinal ever, and now we have the final 15. It has been a wonderful weekend. It's been a hard-fought weekend. I know that you are exhausted. I know the judges are exhausted, but for the next few hours, give it one more shot, give it everything you have, and then at the end, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to reflect on just what the journey has been, because it has been remarkable, and all of you have been incredible and outstanding, so thank you. Before we begin, I just want to take the opportunity to thank our tabulation staff for the weekend. Our tabulation staff was Victoria Beard from Texas, Brittany Stanchik from Arizona, our co-chair Ursula Gruber from Illinois. We had our committee of legislative drafters pulled from all across the country who wrote the legislation that you debated this weekend. Of course, we have the University of Kentucky Tournament of Champions staff, Dave Arnett and Lincoln Garrett, Adrian Bravero from William and Mary, and the other countless people who have worked in order to make this tournament happen. Tournaments don't just happen in a vacuum because somebody says, hey, let's do it. There's an incredible amount of work that goes into it, and we would not be able to do this without the University of Kentucky. And of course, Dr. J.W. Patterson, Tournament of Champions founder. In terms of the round that we have today, the debate will be similar to what you have done before with a few exceptions. First off, all speeches in this round are 4 minutes long, not the standard 3 minutes. We will feature direct questioning, as we have 2 minutes after the sponsorship and first negative, 1 minute for each speech thereafter. We will still utilize the one-sided debate rule that we've been using all weekend. If there are 2 consecutive speeches on the same side, you must move to the opposite side. We will not entertain a 3rd consecutive speech on the same side. This is congressional debate, not congressional informative or oratory. Judges, what we are going to ask is, to the greatest extent possible, please have your cameras on so that the competitors are able to react to your reactions. It just keeps the round dynamic. Each judge has 2 ballots. One ballot will be for the 12 speakers in the room. Your second ballot is for the 3 presiding officer candidates. At the end of the round, you will fill out the 2 separate ballots. The 3 presiding officer candidates will be ranked against each other, 1, 2, 3, on the basis of how you felt they did as the presiding officer. And then scorers, you will rank the competitors in the round 1 through 8, and the parliamentarian will rank all the way through. I mentioned that we have 3 presiding officers. Each presiding officer will preside for 8 speeches, and then they will turn the gavel over to the next chair. On my other monitor, I have the 3 names plugged into random.org. Normally we would draw numbers, but that's kind of difficult in this environment. I am going to press randomize. And our order of presiding. Our first presiding officer will be Joshua Hanson. Our second presiding officer will be Jacob Cow. And our third presiding officer will be William Tong. At this point, I'm going to turn the round over to our parliamentarian, TOC Congressional Debate Champion, Kate Kleinley, for introductions, judge introductions, and other round information. Good luck, and I will see you in a few hours.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. So yeah, as was just outlined, hi, my name is Kate. I am a veteran alumni of Congressional Debate myself. So I left the circuit when I graduated high school in 2016. That year, I also did win the TOC. It was in person back then, so a little different. But basically, that's all to say I'm very, very familiar with the event. So I understand speaking style, sources, quality of analysis, quality of debate, protocol, things like that. For me, my paradigm is a pretty even split between presentation and analysis. So I think it's really important, you probably all know this, you're here in the final, but to have really high caliber sources, things that we can verify, things that are well known, but also to deliver them in a really clear and understandable way, not to be too verbose. One thing that I really like to note is that it's very, very important to deliver intros and conclusions. A good debater can start their speech and go straight into analysis and explain to us what we need to know, but a great debater can explain to us what we need to know and give us analysis while still taking time out to make it sound really nice and to tell us the scope and the impact of why what they're saying matters. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but yeah, that's me. And if the other judges would like to give their paradigms, maybe a little bit about their background as well, that would be great.
I can go. My name is Tammy Trout McIntyre. I'm from the great state of Minnesota, and I coach PF, LD, and congressional debate. I've been doing it for years, and congressional debate is by far my favorite type of debate. Everything that our parliamentarian said, also will add on. I love a rebuttal. I love rebuttal. And of course, you all know to put that in, but I like it right away, starting with that first neg even. I'm looking for rebuttal throughout. And of course, I don't need to tell you some of the minor things. I don't like rehash stuff like that, but I also like engagement in the debate. I notice some people give their speeches and it's kind of one and done and they wait for the next speech. I want those questions in there. I factor in the quality of the questions into the rankings and how many questions you're rising for and things like that, because I think that's really important to stay engaged. I know it's been a long 3 days, but good luck to all of you. Congratulations.
I have nothing to add. I am a coach and judge, but I have nothing to add other than do what brought you here, okay? Do what got you here. That's what I want to see.
Hi, I'm Lillian Adiemi. I'm from the great state of Texas, and she said Minnesota, you know. I have really nothing to add, just like the other judges said, but hey, have fun. This is the TOC. You have made it in a year, the pandemic year. And hey, just have fun. And I'm excited about judging this round.
Okay, hi everybody. Congratulations, you made it so far. I'm looking for new arguments, concise answers during questioning. I have nothing to add. Everything is good. So good luck to everybody.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Joe Tiklak, representing the great state of Arkansas. I'm a debate coach at Little Rock Central. I have nothing else to add except to say just continue to do what you do, and I'll be voting for the best debating.
My name's Leo Lee. I'm from the great state of Illinois, and I was a former competitor as well in congressional debate. Nothing really to add. I think in general, if you want to have good clash, you have to have good explanations of both the arguments and the others. So factor that in as well. I think that's really important too.
I'm from Texas, and I'm my background's in policy and LD, so I'll be flowing around mostly. This is the second time I've judged the finals of TOC Congress, and I think I judged it like 5 years ago. I think I might have judged Judge Kindly, I think. But yeah, just I'm looking for a good narrative. So again, just a good intro that sets the tone, a good conclusion that sort of tells me what is the story, why is it important. But yeah, I'm mostly just be flowing like if it was a debate round.
My name is Anna Payne. I'm from the state of Iowa. So if any of you are familiar with Iowa Congress, I think one of my favorite things about Congress is that it's actually a combination of debate and public speaking with the performance side of speech. And so you have that opportunity to bring all of the pieces together. And I think that pretty much everything Judge finally said stands. So good luck and congratulations.
Awesome. I think that was all of the judges, if I was counting correctly. So if anyone has any questions about the paradigms, feel free to let us know. But if everything is clear, then is everyone ready to just sort of get right into it, get started? Senator Yoon?
Sorry, just for one quick question. How hard is the hard cap this round?
I think, to my knowledge, it's hard, but I'm not sure if we have any flexibility. Kevin, do we have any flexibility?
Well, each competitor will get 2 speeches. And so we basically go until each competitor has 2 speeches, which 12 competitors, 2 speeches, 24, which allows each presiding officer to preside for 8. I believe that there is a 4-hour cap. If we're getting to 4 hours and we have not completed 24 speeches yet, something has gone seriously wrong. So, if we get there, then yes, 4 hours is a hard cap, but I have never seen this round go that far.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, in that case, then are there any motions on the floor? Senator Gu,
I move to open the floor for docket nominations.
is there a second? Okay, any further motions? Sorry, any nominations? Senator Reeser?
I nominate docket A consisting of the policing bill, followed by the broadband bill, followed by the NIMBY bill.
Is there a second? Great, seeing many seconds. Are there any further nominations? Senator Martinez?
I nominate docket B consisting of broadband, then decriminalization or the police bill, and NIMBY.
Is there a second? Awesome. Any further nominations? Senator Sun?
Barring any further nominations, I move to close the floor for docket nominations.
And is there a second? Awesome. In that case, then the floor is now closed. In terms of voting for the docket, let's see, if everyone could hold up their placard when I call for a vote on A, that would be great. And just to only hold it up when I call for the vote, then to put it back down afterwards, and I'll count as you have the placards up. So all in favor of docket A, if you could just raise your placards right now. Okay, and all in favor of docket B, please. Okay, so docket A has it. So we are going to be going with that docket today. Are there any motions? Any motions on the floor? Okay, I'm going to turn the floor over then to the presiding officer. I believe it's Senator Hansen is first, and we can take it from there.
Thank you to our parliamentarian, and also thank you to all of our judges, first for your paradigms, and additionally for being here in the first place. Committing to judge up to 4 hours of congressional debate is a lot. It's a lot for us to compete. We appreciate your continued support throughout this year, everything that's happened in speech and debate over the last 2 years, ensuring that we continue doing this activity that we all love. With that in mind, I'd like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Senator Joshua Hanson. I will be the first presiding officer for this final round of the Tournament of Champions congressional debate. I will be serving for the first 8 speeches of the debate today. This is my 4th year of congressional debate. I've been doing Congress all 4 years, mostly within my state of Wyoming. It has been a wonderful experience to be able to branch out more this year into the national circuit, and I am exceptionally honored to be among the 15 of you at probably the greatest stage in the nation this year. It is truly an honor. I'd like to quickly now move into my procedures. I'll preface for anything that I do not specify in the following minute or so, please defer to first TOC procedures, then the NSDA Unified Manual, then to Robert Rules of Order, newly revised 11th edition, pursuant with the tournament instruction. I'd first like to direct everyone's attention to the spreadsheet for which I'll be tracking precedents and outline my procedures in today's debate. That is now pasted in the chat. You all should be able to access it, both judges and competitors. I'll quickly direct your attention to the linked docket. If anyone needs to reference the bills that we're going to be using throughout today's debate, they are linked there, specifically on a PDF that doesn't have any of the bills from the prior sessions. It's cleaner. I believe we'll be going page 3, then 1, then 2, in line with FC, FA, FB, which will be our docket for today's debate. You can use the spreadsheet, hold me accountable. I don't think any of the 3 PO candidates should be making mistakes at this point in the competition, but just in case, I want to be open with everything. As far as how I'm going to be calling for speeches, of course, precedence and recency will be tracked on that spreadsheet. After I thank the prior speaker, I will quickly ask affirmation or negation speakers, respectively, to please raise your placard. We'll go about as fast as that. Please be attentive and be ready to raise your placard when the prior questioning block is beginning to wrap up. If recency has not been established, I'll wait approximately 5 seconds for everyone to raise their placard for the sake of technological equity. I know all of our Wi-Fis are different. I will choose randomly. I am from Wyoming. I do not usually compete on the national circuit. I could not be biased if I wanted to be. With recency, and since recency will not be established for my session, that will be the operation that we're going with. I'd like to remind the chamber, as mentioned by Tab, the chamber will automatically conclude after 24 speeches or at 4 p.m. EST. We shouldn't get there, but I hope to set an expedient pace to not risk even getting close to that hard cap. With that in mind, calling for questions. After I thank the speaker, I will ask all those wishing to question, raise your placards. I'll be using soft precedents for questioning. Same process as calling for speeches, except I will not return to the same questioner in the same block unless there's no one else who would like to question that hasn't questioned that speaker, and that will go regardless of recency. And I also would ask everyone to try and be brief and cordial in questioning. In prior rounds that I've shared at this tournament, if you're talking over the speaker, we cannot hear either of you. There's no point. And at this point, we should have enough respect for each other to actually want to listen to the answers to other questions and vice versa. So I ask again, please be cordial. After a questioning period, I will again move swiftly to call for the next speaker to ensure efficiency. So if you have a point or motion, the time to do so would be after a questioning block before a speech. Please verbally interrupt and hold up your placard. I'll recognize them at that time. As far as time signals, I would like to remind the chamber that you are allotted 4 minutes for each speech at the Tournament of Champions final session. Because we are all so used to a shorter length, I will be giving more time signals than I usually would to help our speakers stay on track as well as they can. I will not be providing audible indicators because of Zoom's tendency to only pick up one noise, so please pay attention to the following hand signals. 1 minute into your speech, I will hold up 1 finger. 2 minutes, 2 fingers. 3 minutes, 3 fingers. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, I will hold up a C. At 3 minutes and 50 seconds, I will hold up both hands, count you down 351, 352, down to 4 minutes, and then back up 401, 402, 403, up to 410. Please try to be finishing your speech by 4 minutes. The last 10 seconds are purely a grace period. I will verbally cut you off at 4 minutes and 10 seconds in an attempt to save you from the 1-point penalty the tournament establishes for going over time. If you keep going, judges are completely free to mark you down for that. For the sake of fairness, try to keep it to 4 minutes. During questioning quickly, I will hold up a C 15 seconds into the direct questioning block halfway through, and at 25 seconds in, I'll hold up 5 fingers and count you down 26, 27, 28, 30. There is no grace period, so I will cut you off verbally and move on to the next question block. As a rule of thumb, I ask you to not begin asking a new question once we have hit 25 seconds. You will not receive an answer. You will likely not finish your question. I don't like cutting people off, but I think I've cut every person off at this tournament thus far. It's okay. I understand. We all want to get every word in. But for the sake of expediency and respect, I'd ask do your best. If you ever need a reminder for these timing procedures, please defer to the left column of my public spreadsheet. All of the speech indicators, 1, 2, 3, 4, are listed on that document. At this point in debate, having the docket set and really everything ready to go, we will move directly into debate on our first piece of legislation. But
Point of
first,
inquiry.
exactly any points of inquiry or questions, let's first go to Senator Reeser.
Thank you. So if we need to exit chamber, would you like the point of personal privilege in the chat or verbally?
That's a great clarification, Senator Reeser. I appreciate that. I would ask for those in the chat, but please try to time it at that same point between questions and speeches so you don't have pop-ups during your speech. Try to not distract people as well as you can. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but if you do need to leave the chamber, point of personal privilege in the chat. I'll recognize it in the chat as well. Are there any further questions? If so, please raise your placard. Seeing none, we move forward to debate on our first piece of legislation, being a bill to promote demilitarization and reinvest in our communities. This is docket finals C. There are no authors at this tournament, so I'll be calling directly for a sponsor. If you'd like to sponsor this legislation, please raise your placard now. I would ask the chamber, please don't be afraid to give early speeches. This is the final round of the TOC. We all should be prepared to speak on every bill. And frankly, I think all of you are capable of speaking a little extemporaneously using the points you already have. This was an issue in semifinals. I don't want it to be an issue here. If you're planning on speaking in neg, please be ready to give a first neg. And I would really ask for a sponsorship as soon as possible, especially given that we all put this on the docket first. Senator Wu, thank you for starting us off.
Thank you. Hey everyone, Senator Wu, first time today, spelled W-U, sponsoring this piece of legislation regarding demilitarization. For my judges, I know there are a lot of you. Any indication when you're ready, and if you need anything else from me, please just let me know. And then I am going to be timing myself. I'll just pin my PO. Cool. Okay, looks like everyone's good. The modern shareholder theory of business has resulted in American corporations serving the needs of their investors over what is good for the general public, what is good for America, and what is good for their own interests. We have lived the impact of when a small group of detached individuals on Wall Street and in Washington set the agenda and sew the fabric of American business. The federal funding of local police has the exact same distancing effect. Insofar as police are increasingly reliant on federal funding from the Capitol, it creates a separation between cops and their communities, fueling the fire of an already stark power dynamic. When police receive so much from a distant benefactor in the Beltway, they feel less beholden to the people they actually serve. Today's legislation rebalances the power dynamic, putting more power into the community, and that's why you must pass. First, my legislation eliminates the programs that do not work. Congress has the power of the purse under Section 2 of this legislation to pull $75 billion from existing programs that we can choose and move that money into more productive ones. Right now, the bulk of our appropriation goes to programs that don't ostensibly make policing any better. 2 DOJ grants. First, COPS, the Community-Oriented Policing Services, and second, Burn JAG, the Burn Justice Assistance Grants, constitute the bulk of federal expenditures, but they are also the biggest offenders. Sebastian Hickey of the Center for Law and Social Policy explains in July of 2020 that the COPS program provides hundreds and millions of grants to hire more police officers. And in theory, this is meant as a deterrent for violent crime, but in practice has led to millions of arrests annually for traffic violations and low-level drug possession. Equally as powerful are the Burn grants, the single largest source of federal criminal justice funds for states and localities. According to data from the National Criminal Justice Association, in 2016, 60% of those funds were used to purchase weapons, tactical gear, and body armor. Instead of pursuing programs beneficial to communities, the JAG is used to make police departments more lethal. Both of these grants were designed as to stick a Band-Aid on the bullet wound of violent crime that tore this nation apart decades ago. Yet, instead of bandages, they have transformed into the gun that fires the bullet. This legislation mechanistically stops ineffective grant programs from continuing to shill hundreds of millions to police. Section 1 disables any further federal appropriation to local law enforcement, meaning, at the very least, we stop adding to harmful expenditures that make policing so unreliable. But second, passed to reduce the share of federal involvement in local policing wholesale. At the end of the day, national politics has always been bad at local politics. An Urban Institute analysis on community-driven public safety found in September of 2020 that federal investment into policing fails to alter underlying social conditions that continually generate violence and harm at the neighborhood level. It's no surprise when the federal government has to shill out millions and millions of dollars to localities across the United States, they can't exercise any coordination or oversight over every single dollar they give out. And I'm going to preemptively agree with every single one of the piecemeal instances where the negative will try to sell you on individual cases where appropriation at the federal level might be beneficial. There's a reason my bill doesn't reallocate and reinvest every cent. If a program pays demonstrable dividends to a community, it's worthwhile. In a world where this bill is law, we have to be more methodical and deliberate with the programs we consent to keep around, giving us the opportunity to promote expenditures that foster community-based policing. And the Marshall Project summarizes in 2017 that using communities to deploy customized place-based solutions to crime, we keep our blocks from becoming de facto cemeteries and help make safe, functioning neighborhoods. When you put more social workers and health professionals into play, you reduce the amount of calls that police have to respond to writ large. When you invest in deployment, that creates economic outs. Money puts a hand on the scale. The stronger those branches get, the less of an active role our cops need to play. Please pass.
Thank you, Senator Wu, for that speech of exactly 4 minutes. We now have 4 direct questioning blocks, this being a sponsorship. Those wishing to question, please raise your placards. Let's begin with Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Do federal grants go towards training police officers?
Some of them do, yeah.
So why is it a good idea to eliminate and cease all of those today?
Because my bill takes away 75% of the $100 billion. We leave enough for police departments to still function. They don't need $100 billion just to train officers.
If they rely on federal grants to train their officers, what will they do when we pass this legislation and eliminate those grants?
They can do 2 things, right? They can be more methodical and responsible with their use of current federal money, or they can shift that over to the state
We
level.
move to Senator Malhotra.
When we have funding that we give to someone, do we have oversight over them?
Right now, because the federal government shills hundreds of millions to every single locality, our oversight is so strained.
I'm saying, but inevitably we do have oversight. If we take away that funding,
In a vacuum, we have oversight, but my argument here
I'm
is
asking you, if we take away funding, do we have oversight? Do
the
we
same
control
amount
their
that we have now, sure.
How do you have control over someone's actions if you're not funding them?
You do
If you're
still
not giving
fund them,
any
you just
money,
fund
they
them
have
far
no-
less.
They have no incentive to listen to you because you're not giving them any money.
Thank you, Senators. We move to Senator Juneja.
What's the only constitutional leverage this Congress has to reform police?
You tell me.
Federal grants. If we take away those federal grants, what incentive do police who are overrun at the local level by police unions have to reform?
So my bill doesn't take away every single dime and nickel of federal involvement into police.
That's
We leave
literally
enough money to still provide grants.
Section 1 ends all federal appropriations. So
All
that's
further federal appropriations, existing ones at this level, can still continue.
Thank you, Senators. We move to Senator Chelery.
Okay, so outside of government funding, what's the other largest source of like money for police departments?
Federal funding, outside of federal funding?
Outside of any government funding whatsoever, federal, state, or local.
It comes from, I guess, private donors, stuff like that.
Where actually, so the way they get the vast majority of their money is by arrests and ticket fees, right? If you pass this legislation, what
Oh, you're talking
stops
about
them
revenue
from
streams. Okay.
Yeah, so what stops them from just increasing arrests on the same low-level crimes that you talk about?
I turn you to my second argument. If you invest in community-based deployment solutions, like putting more social workers on the streets, police have to respond to less calls. That reduces that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wu, for giving our sponsorship. Negation speakers, please raise your placard. I again remind the chamber that this is the final session of the Tournament of Champions. You all should be prepared to be able to speak in the negation early, if need be. Thank you, Senator Malhotra.
That's Senator Divya Malhotra, spelled Mehrotra. It's a little bit of a harder name to spell. I'd like to hold it up. Just give me a smile or nod whenever you're ready. Awesome. Awesome. Great. Sorry, I'm just looking around for a second. My apologies for taking some time. Okay. I see most of the judges. Parley, I'm assuming you're ready. And Pio, I'm assuming you're always ready.
That's correct.
When Americans dial 911, they should feel confident that police officers will show up to prevent a tragedy, not cause one themselves. But passing today does nothing but exacerbate the anxiety that most Americans feel every time they dial those numbers. So make sure that when we fail today's legislation, no American has to dial 911 and feel like they're the target of the next crime. Let's look to Senator Wu's entire advocacy on the affirmation. He's probably going to basically start off what the rest of the affirmation is trying to do. Explain to us that by removing all future federal funding, we're somehow going to be able to improve our community at large. Let's take a twofold approach to see why that inevitably doesn't happen. That's where you turn to our cross-examination periods with the four of us. First, turn to my cross-examination period. I talk about how when we don't give someone funding, we lack oversight. I think that's a pretty logical thing to assume. When you're not giving someone money, they have no incentive to listen to you. But that's why turn to the American Action Forum on September 29th of 2020. They actually clarify why that occurs. They explain that because when we cut off more than 97% of police budgets, which include salaries, pensions, and benefits, those same officers have no incentive to listen to this Congress. Why does that matter? That's when you turn to Senator Mazumdar's entire argument in cross-examination. He explains to you that the reason why we need that oversight is to ensure that police officers listen to reform movements. That's something quantified by the Princeton University on February 25th of 2018, where they explained that increases in police funding, particularly from the federal government, by about 3.2% decrease the victimization of people that are calling 911 in the first place. Like I mentioned to you at the beginning, 911 shouldn't be a death sentence. Increases in police funding, particularly to training programs, particularly to salaries and pensions, prevent that. 911 shouldn't be another death sentence. Failing today's legislation prevents it from being that way. But then let's look to the economic impact of today's legislation has on reducing crime rates. The American Economic Journal in 2017 explains that on the opposite side, every time you increase funding for police officers, $5,800 in increased military spending or police spending leads to roughly about $112,000 saved in the mitigation of crimes, meaning that unlike what Senator Wu's telling you, we're not living in a vacuum where every police officer is trying to shoot Americans. They're actually preventing things like robberies, assaults, and thefts. Don't basically villainize every police officer just to pass today's piece of legislation. Understand that we finally have the opportunity to act. But why does today's legislation enable criminals? Because it transforms our police officers accidentally into them. And that's because it worsens police misconduct. And that comes from a phenomenon known as police shortages. Like I mentioned to you at the beginning, 97% of the federal funding that we give to police officers goes particularly towards their salaries and pensions. When they don't have that money to fund how they can put food on their table, pay for their children's healthcare or their daycares, they stop working at those places in the first place. And when they don't work at police departments, here's what happens. The Guardian on April 8th of 2019 explains the use of force complaints almost doubled as officers in an understaffed department were required to work overtime. Meaning that every time we see a greater police shortage because they're not getting the salaries or pensions that they want, they are more likely to use force against our own civilians. So Senator Wu, that oversight that you're looking for on the affirmation hardly ever exists. In fact, you're giving a federal mandate for those police officers to now target our civilians. Fail today's legislation, 911 shouldn't be the reason why my civilians are dead.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 58 seconds. That being a first negation, we are in line for 4 more questioning blocks. If you'd like to question, please raise your placards now. Let's begin with Senator Lynn.
Hi, Senator. So we can assume that there may be a decrease in the amount of police officers employed, right?
Yes.
Why is that a problem if there's also a decreased responsibility for them inside the communities themselves?
They still have to respond to robberies, assaults, thefts.
No, right, but the vast majority of police calls are not for robberies and assaults. They're for other things too that now social workers would be able to adjust for, right?
You can't guarantee to me that every part of today's funding is going to go to those programs, the community programs.
Doesn't the section say that in the bill though?
I'd like to see oversight that ensures it.
Thank you, Senator. We move to Senator Sun.
Thanks. How would you weigh the loss of police funding with the investment into our communities?
I would say the increase in police officers victimizing people of our community is probably the biggest impact.
Did you compare that to community investment in your speech?
Yeah, I can compare
Because
that.
it's the AF that accesses that impact and the neg doesn't, right?
So I'm telling you that when we pass, we oftentimes allow police officers to victimize.
I know, I get your point in a vacuum, but I don't understand it comparatively. Which one is more important?
Like comparatively, the AF world
Thank you,
is.
senators. We move to Senator Wu.
Thank you. So I have a really simple question about your argument on oversight. In the status quo, if 60% of our burn JAG funds are being used to militarize cops when they're supposed to be used towards our communities, is that oversight?
We can improve oversight. I don't see the reason to completely remove funding when we have the ability to reform.
We can improve oversight. We give billions of dollars to hundreds of thousands of localities. How do we improve oversight at every single level?
So, like Senator Sun loves to say, we have the power of the purse. We can absolutely reform the power of the purse to prevent us from militarizing.
Thank you, senators. We move to Senator Brissett.
Okay, so what forms of oversight, if any, do we have in the status quo over the federal funding that's given to these local law enforcement agencies?
So in terms of the bureaucracy, we have the Department of Justice. In terms of congressional committees, we have the House Justice Committee and the House and the Senate Justice Committee.
That's exactly correct. And what sorts of things does the Department of Justice investigate in those local law enforcement agencies?
Use of force complaints.
Exactly.
Anything
exactly. And has that oversight helped reduce use of force complaints?
Not right now, but let's improve it. I don't see why that's a reason to pass.
Thank you. We now recognize the next affirmation speaker. Please raise your placard. Let's go first to Senator Martinez.
Thank the chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Martinez. I'm speaking on the affirmation of this piece of legislation. I know I have a lot of judges, so if you're not ready, let me know and I'll happily wait. But for my parley and my PO, I am always ready. Thank you.
Just to let everyone know as well, as the parley, you can assume that I'm always ready. I'll let you know if I'm not.
Thank you. Down the street from this congressional chamber, on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the Department of Justice, sits the blind figure of Lady Justice. Her blindfold represents the very ideals of which this federal government was founded, in that justice is blind, as all are equal before the law. Yet as time has progressed, our acknowledgement of the values of our founding fathers has faded, and accordingly, her blindfold has become transparent. Return justice to the judicial system by passing this bill. The first reason we pass today's legislation is to hold police accountable. Senator Mazumdar asked Senator Wu in today's sponsorship speech how we can continue to train police officers if we're taking away funding. I would direct you to Section 3 of today's legislation. It puts $2 billion into investing into the hiring of more personnel and time for law enforcement offices to be held accountable for mass incarceration and decriminalization efforts. Time clearly includes training, and this is more important ever than now, beyond police officers. And this even extends to concerns expressed by Senator Marotra, who champions the negatives advocacy. She's worried about the concerns with police shortages, but when we're investing $2 billion in states to alleviate your concerns, we no longer see that issue. Charles Lehman writes for City Journal on February 5th of 2020, explaining the source of this issue, and that departments are getting fewer newer members from traditional sources, such as family ties and the military. The tight labor market has also made hiring more difficult. At the same time, policing has become a more technologically complex profession, one that often requires highly educated applicants. On top of that, time is necessary to better train these applicants. And besides the need for officers, there's also a necessity for the administrative professionals to keep departments running and transparent. That's how we ensure accountability. But the problem that exists right now is that administrative offices and state judicial systems are especially under pressure. Marie Albiges writes that the Virginia General Assembly mandated that offices staff one prosecutor for every 75 body cameras, or come to an agreement with the locality on a similar formula. 93% of public defenders in Virginia who responded reported difficulty in finding time to review all body camera footage when tasked with it, and 73% said that they were unable to in other case-related work. But when we actually invest in more personnel, there's a greater opportunity for transparency, not only by actually having videos and police reports processed, but available to the public. Stephen Zansberg writes to the American Bar Association on January 22nd of 2021, explaining the public must be readily informed and willing by police officers, mayors, and other officials to foster community trust that makes the justice system easier to facilitate. That includes having access to this data. Now, not only will there be more efforts to advance our efforts in launching body camera programs and further transparency methods on state levels, but expand the impacts of those initiatives with comprehensive funding to gain the sole non-monetary resource that keep police accountable: trust. But the second reason you pass is to elicit change. The winner of today's debate on this bill is the one that truly changes the status quo for the better. Let's return to Section 3. We have $2 billion to provide to state governments. The great benefit of today's legislation is that it's not exactly specific. Senator Morocha argues that police departments won't listen to us without funding, but unfortunately, most departments checked out a long time ago. In fact, Crowley and Pearl write for the Center for American Progress on October 7th of 2020, explaining the two problems with previous grant programs were: one, it was hard to qualify them for them, and two, there's not enough funding. We alleviate that with $2 billion in funding. And second, we broaden eligibility. That's how you encourage accountability. And that is the very basis of our judicial system. Let's return to those values by voting in the affirmation.
Thank you, Senator Martinez, for your speech of 402. We're now in line for 2 questioning blocks, as we will be for the remainder of the bill and the remainder of my time presiding. Those wishing to question, please raise your placards now. Senator Reeser, start us off.
If we're still allowed to provide body cameras to local law enforcement under this legislation, then what isn't considered banned by this legislation, considering that we literally are providing grants to local law enforcement if we're giving them body cameras?
Right, so the problem with grants is that not enough jurisdictions are actually receiving them. We're putting a lot of money into it, but it's really hard to be eligible. When states have more money to invest in specific programs, such as body camera footage, we now have federal accountability through this $2 billion
But we're not actually expanding any sort of appropriations in this
Now we
bill,
are
we?
on state level.
Move to Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Can you tell me what percentage of police departments already have body cameras?
Not a lot so far, but many are making efforts.
In most departments with over 500 people, it's 80%. If body cameras have been ineffective at stopping
Right,
police
but they're not being used properly. My argument is that even when they have body cameras, there doesn't exist anybody to review the footage and make sure that it's properly cut and uploaded to public databases. So most people in communities never even see the data come to life.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senators. Negation speakers, please raise your placards. Senator Chellery.
Thank you. That's Senator Chellery. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. That's Chellury, the first time today. My judges are scattered all over the Zoom, so if anybody's not ready, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, I'll get started as soon as I pull up the timer. Great. Everyone looks ready. For far too long, our Americans have suffered at the brutal hands of American police, and it's the federal government that put them there. When Americans continue to struggle, it becomes the duty of this Congress to enact regulation upon the tight grasp that police hold over our innocent people. But at the point at which today's piece of legislation seals the fate for millions of innocent citizens that the affirmation defends in today's round, it becomes ever more important that you failed this piece of legislation. First, you failed because passing leads to increased police arrests and detainments in the status quo. Let's first understand something. CNBC in June of 2020 explains that police funding largely comes from local, state, and the federal government. That makes up the majority of police funding in the status quo. The reason that's so important, though, is because they quantify exactly why the federal government is at fault for extreme police funding. They explain that upwards of 20% of police funding in the status quo comes from the federal government, and that's risen over 200% over the last 20 years. So what does that empirics tell you in the context of this round? The affirmation can contest however much possible that police don't need federal funding. Let's take that argument at its highest ground. Say police don't even need that federal funding. The fact of the matter is, police are accustomed and dependent not only on federal funding, but on an increase in that funding on an annual basis. Ultimately, if they can't get federal funding under today's piece of legislation, they're going to look to other sources of funding. So let me make something clear. At the point at which police don't even lose funding when you pass, the affirmation loses every unique impact they give you in this round. So why then, uniquely, do police not lose funding under this piece of legislation? That's explained by The Atlantic in June of 2020. They quantify for you that outside of government funding, one of the largest sources for police money and revenue is the money they get from ticket fees and bail payments. Essentially, the more tickets police hand out, the more detainments they conduct, and the more arrests they enforce, the more money they get as a result. I agree with the affirmation that in a large percentage of the time, the police have a malicious intent. If that's the case, they won't have any issue increasing arrests when you pass today's piece of legislation. And at that point, the act has no remaining ground in today's round. So what impact uniquely pushes the negation ahead? Increased arrests means even more targeting of these same minority communities that the affirmation advocates for. BBC explains just 1 week ago that inside of the United States, African Americans are far more likely to be detained and arrested than their counterparts, specifically with minor crimes like drug possession. The same crimes Senator Wu says will stop when you pass today's piece of legislation. When I asked him about that in questioning, he argued that increasing community investment means police have to respond to fewer calls. Under this legislation, it's not who police have to respond to, but who they want to respond to. If anything, it encourages the same officers to conduct arrests for crimes at an even lower level, hurting more minority communities in the status quo. Under that piece of legislation, that's the net negative you see when you affirm, and for that reason, you fail. But second, let's understand where the affirmation falls flat in today's round. Senator Wu, you argue that the federal government's funding money towards local police doesn't allow for community investment. That's the burden of the affirmation in today's round. When the negation uniquely proves to you why there's a net negative on cutting federal funding to police, the affirmation has to prove to you why cutting federal funding and investing into the community are mutually exclusive. Because in our world, nothing prevents you from maintaining federal funding and funding community investment at the same time. Second, Senator Martinez explains to you this argument about a reduction in crime due to extreme community investment. Understand that neither of the impacts she gives you in this round are accessible unless police actually lose funding and their solvency under today's legislation. I just explained to you why that doesn't happen. Then she explains to you how funding states enables body cameras to actually take place amongst police. Here's the problem with that. With states already funding a large percent of a police budget, if the majority of state governments wanted to fund body cameras and the review of them, they would have already done it by now. The issue is leaving it up to state governments doesn't actually create enforcement under this piece of legislation. For those reasons, you fail.
Thank you, Senator Celery, for that speech of 401. I recognize 2 questioning blocks. All those wishing to question, please raise your placards now. That will go first to Senator Gu.
So in the past, when police have lost funding, whether on the state or federal level, have they resulted in giving out way more tickets?
So the problem with that is in the past, we've never cut like 100% of federal funding to police, right? That's 20%.
Wait, I'm just saying like cuts in general. Have they compensated by giving people way more tickets like you tell us they're going to?
They literally increase arrests when that happens, yes.
All right, that's fine. I'll get to that in my speech.
We go to Senator Martinez.
All right, so how do people usually get arrested?
So like Senator Wu talked about, the majority of people the affirmation defends are like low-level drug possession crimes, right? Those arrests increase when you pass.
Someone calls the police and then they get arrested. When we invest in community resource officers, are there going to be as many arrests when we now have other personnel to handle those issues?
Right, but the other issue with that is that community investment is a very long-term solution, right? If police are increasing arrests in the short term, there's no solution for that.
We want to change this for the next 100 years instead of waiting 10 years for horrible impact.
Affirmation speakers, please now raise your placard. Let's go to Senator Sun.
Thank you. Senator Sun, spelled S-U-N, first time today on the affirmation. Once again, that's S-U-N on the affirmation. There are a lot of judges, so if any of you can't see me or can't hear me fine, just any indication. Otherwise, I'll just give it a few seconds and I'll begin. All right, I think we're getting thumbs up across the board. So PO, you're ready. Let me just pin your video and we'll be good to go. Awesome. When you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're holding a gun, everything looks like a target. For too long, the only community relationship this Congress has empowered with our inaction is that with the police. And the result? People are literally getting shot on the street. I'm asking this Congress to have the courage to hold the institution of the police accountable, to diversify our toolkit. The point of today's bill has been misrepresented this entire debate. This legislation is intended to reduce the influence and role of the police. This debate has given us 3 warrants as to why that is the case. First, Section 2 increases funding to community development. American Progress explains last July that Richmond, 10 years after launching a community development office, decreased homicide rates by 80%. This statistic outweighs any arguments that negation senators can bring up about the funding loss toward police departments, because Brookings in June explains that a 60-year study explained that increased funding to police did not significantly correlate with less crime. But the second warrant here is Section 3, funding to decrease mass incarceration. I'd actually like to distance myself from Senator Martinez and take this another direction. Courts explains in 2015 that mass incarceration systems from the states have caused a net increase in crime because of the increase of recidivism and costs. These 2 warrants jointly mean that when you decrease crime under today's legislation, you decrease the necessity or the influence of the police to begin with. Third and finally, the third warrant that's been contested is Section 1, cutting off federal funding to the police. Senator Marocha tells you this decreases the number of police. I agree completely. The rest of my speech is about turning the impact of a shortage of police. It is the best way for this Congress to move forward to decrease number of police on the streets. Here's why. The reason that police unions representing police have leverage and power in the status quo to push for reforms is 1, because police have such an outsized role, and 2, because there's so many officers. Senator Chellary, that's why we need to cut off funding from police as well as increase funding to community initiatives. Because as crime goes down and number of officers go down, unions have less leverage for their malicious reforms. Spectrum News explains in 2019 that after the officer who killed Eric Gordon was fired, NYPD arrests decreased significantly as unions called for the commissioner's resignation. Exactly because unions have flexed their leverage in the past due to their outsized role. But as crime goes down and numbers go down, these unions' powers go down as well. This is all incredibly important because it is the most direct link to the impact about police violence. Senator Mazumdar in cross-examination is worried about cuts to training, but police don't kill because they're untrained. They kill because there's no accountability for their actions. NPR explains in January that after gaining union rights, officers killed substantially more civilians in each county where the overwhelming majority of citizens were non-white. Senator Juneja and Marotra are worried about federal oversight, but federal oversight in terms of funding doesn't matter if the unions in power continue to push for the reforms such as qualified immunity and arbitration choices that allow police to escape scot-free from crimes. Finally, Senator Chellary, the very fact that police are bad, as you imply with your entire speech, is the entire reason we must hold them accountable. This bill is that first step. This Congress's only job is to hold ourselves accountable to our civilians. Their lives depend on our courage to use our greatest tool, our vote.
Thank you, Senator Sun, for that speech of 4 minutes and 9 seconds. All those wishing to question, please raise your placard. Goes first to Senator Marotra.
Why do police officers come for individuals in the first place?
Comfort or come for?
Like come for.
Because there's been a call.
Or and when they do, why do they increasingly want to arrest them?
Because they don't feel like there are any consequences for their actions.
Is it the sentencing nature of our justice system that ensures that?
No, it's because police know that even if they are fired for misconduct, they can be rehired.
No,
and many times they aren't fired in the first place.
Why do we revert to arrests in the first place? Is it because of
Thank you, senators. We move to Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator. So what type of leverage do we have over police unions and all of that when we pass?
The leverage we have with this bill that is increased is the leverage that comes from local leaders who have more leverage to say no to police unions.
Have local leaders empirically done anything to combat?
The status quo shows that they haven't done much because they don't have leverage, because police unions have so much power. I'm arguing we need to gradually decrease their role.
How does taking away our funding increase local city?
The warrants I explained first 2 minutes of my speech, 3 warrants right
Thank you, senators.
Thank you.
Negation speakers, please raise your placard. Let's go to Senator Juneja.
I thank the chair. For everyone's reference, I'm Senator Juneja, and this is my first time speaking in today's round. With that being said, I'm happy to be speaking on the negation. Can I get a sign or signal from my judges when they're ready? All right, we look good. The current situation between the police and our citizens is that they're supposed to protect them, and their conduct has been deplorable. When I turn on the news, everyone is blaming someone else for this situation. And in my opinion, there's plenty of blame to go around. Everyone in this chamber, to state houses, to governors' mansions, to police chiefs and mayors, even some citizens, can take the blame for where we're at. But the blame is ignoring the very thing the Black Lives Matter movement and others have asked for. They don't want to assign blame. They want a solution. It's because today's legislation takes away our only ability to create solutions that we must negate. Today's discussion has centered around how this legislation affects police forces. Senator Sun, fundamentally, the fact that should define today's debate is that we do not help reform, we only clean our hands of responsibility. First, Senator Wu, you talk about how bad the 1033 program and other militarization programs are. And I want to clarify, I wholeheartedly agree with you. We should abolish those programs individually, but this legislation does far more than that. That leads me to the fundamental reason that we defeat today. We give away our power to reform. Section 1 of this legislation ends all federal funding to police departments. Senator Malhotra touched on this, but failed to provide any concrete examples. Let me do that. Right now, our federal grants are the literal only incentive to police reforms for localities who don't have enough leverage to reform. Reuters explains in February of this year that President Biden is creating a $300 million program that gives grants to hire more diverse officers and trains them to develop less adversarial relationships with their communities. And Senator Sun, these types of grants have been successful in the past. The National Public Safety Partnership found in 2013 that the Smart Policing Initiative federal grant, which disincentivized the use of excessive force in police, led to a 30% drop in violent interactions. So Senator Wu, when localities fail to act, we have the power to step up and use our constitutional right of funding to facilitate change. But by passing this legislation, we give up our power to reform. So Senator Wu, Martinez, and Sun, you all want to make a change in police, but you are giving up our only way to do so. There is a difference between making a change and wiping our hands. We may not have done enough in the past, but it's up to this Congress to make sure we shape the future. Now, Senator Wu, Sun, Martinez, and everyone else who talks about the benefits that Section 2 brings through investing in our communities. I agree, we need to fund our communities. But like Senator Chalouri said, that investment and keeping our power over reforming police are not mutually exclusive. Senator Sun, that's why it is literally irrelevant how good Section 2 is if Section 1 just hurts our ability to reform police officers. But why should our power to reform define today's debate? Because without it, we only further empower racist local police departments. The Brennan Center for Justice found in August of 2020 that right now, racism is endemic in our police system, with Black people and Latinos being targeted at a significantly higher rate for searches, arrests, and frisks when compared to their white counterparts. What's most problematic is that the CS Monitor found in November of 2020 that almost all cities and localities lack the ability to reform those problematic practices because of decade-old labor laws and the police unions that Senator Sun talked about. One of the only effective ways to reform is to leverage funding because no police organizations would risk losing their livelihoods. And when our grants make up 40% of police funding, senators, it's clear, funding is the best and only true leverage we have when it comes to reform. Senator Sun, when we pass, we only empower the police unions you talked about. Your entire speech works for the negation. Senator Sun, it's easy and maybe even satisfying to assign blame for the atrocities of today, but that won't get us a solution tomorrow. That's why we negate.
Thank you, Senator Juneja, for your speech of 3 minutes and 58 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placard now. That goes first to Senator Lynn.
Hi, Senator.
Hi. So you tell us that funding is proportional to leverage, right?
I'm saying the more funding we have, the more leverage we have. Yes.
Yeah. When local and state governments fund their police like twice as much as the federal government does, why do they lack leverage?
40%, 60% is because they don't have the power.
The federal government funds 20%, but go on.
40%. We give 40 billion, police are formed at 100 billion funded.
I'm asking, why do they lack leverage if they have more funding?
Because of police unions. We're the only ones who
Why
have.
are we blocked by police unions? Why are we not blocked by police unions? Don't we, are
Thank you,
our
Senator.
also
We move
hindered?
we move to Senator Sun.
Thanks. Why is federal funding a more direct link to reforms than police unions?
Because when we take away federal funding, we empower police unions. Essentially,
No,
police
no, no, no.
unions
But
control.
regardless of the amount of federal funding, if we have federal funding, no matter what, police unions are there to block.
Wait, Senator Sun, police unions control localities. We are
That's my
independent
point.
from those. Yeah.
Yes. So our
That-
leverage means nothing. The only thing we can do is hope to reduce their role.
No, if we decrease our funding, we only empower those unions.
Their role
Thank you,
is
Senators.
decreased under this.
Thank you, Senators. Affirmative speakers, please raise your placard. Let's go to Senator Gu.
Thank you so much. For the first time in today's session, that's Senator Gu, spelled G-U. I know it's super difficult. If I could just get some sort of indication from my judges whenever y'all are ready to go. Thumbs up would be great. Thank you, thank you. All right, assuming everyone's ready, I'll get started shortly. Throughout American history, our greatest difficulties have come when we let our shortcomings in the past shape our strategies for the future. So as American ideals progress, it's crucial that the systems of prejudice that have entrenched inequality are not disguised under a new shape, name, or form. That is what we change today. It is this third cycle in today's round, and not one person has considered, how do police do their job? Tim Lau at the Brennan Center for Justice explains in April 1st of 2020, that in recent years, the largest police departments in our nation have started using computer algorithms that crunch past crime data to tell them where crime is most likely to occur. And after decades of law enforcement targeting minority communities, this prejudice is now codified into ones and zeros, resulting in squadron after squadron of police sent to patrol these communities 24/7. And when the eyes of the law never shut, arrest rates are pushed artificially high, but the consequences are anything but artificial. Affirming today helps reduce this self-fulfilling cycle of crime. Senator Sun references the community investment we create under today's legislation. I want to analyze these specific programs outlined under Section 2. The Journal of Public Economics finds in October of 2017 that investment into health programs like Medicaid expansions have reduced violent crime by up to 6%. Secondly, the Council for a Stronger America found in 2016 that students who participated in educational programs were 70% less likely to be arrested for violent crime. And finally, the International Journal of Offender Therapy and Comparative Criminology finds in 2016 that workforce development programs decreased arrests by up to 15%. Senator Marotra, we won't need as many police to arrest our citizens when they aren't committing as much crime to begin with. Then, Senator Marotra and Senator Juneja in cross-examination, you bring up the most important negation concern. Removing our funding removes our ability to reform the police. But the LA Times in February of 2020 writes that major police unions undo any governmental reform behind their closed doors. And Senators Marotra and Mazumdar, you're worried that cutting funding means police receive less training. However, Senator Chellery, in your speech, you also claim that without any ground, that police will compensate by giving people more tickets. But a 60-year analysis by the Washington Post, Federal Reserve, and Department of Justice in June of 2019 found that cuts in police funding have not resulted in more crime. I want to remind this chamber of a simple truth it seems we've all forgotten. Most people do not wake up in the morning looking to commit crime. For many, a life of crime is the outcome of desperation. So it's high time that we give them the stable healthcare, education, and job training that they can rely on. So today, we correct for our mistakes in the past by protecting the future of these communities. When crime rates fall, so too will the number of uniformed police officers sent to minority communities. And if there is anything the people and the police need right now, it is space. A Gallup poll found in August of last year that for the first time in American history, the majority of the public did not trust the people in charge of protecting them. Conversely, David Lightson at the Urban Institute in August of 2017 found that 90% of police officers did not feel welcome in the communities they're supposed to protect. Right now, Americans sit in fear when they're pulled over and the officer walks up to their car. And for some reason, police have grown even more aggressive towards them. This sheer animosity means that every interaction, no matter how inconsequential, could devolve into brutality. The Harvard School of Economics ultimately concludes that this fragile bond can only be repaired by making sure that unnecessary interactions are decreased and that incidents of police brutality are eradicated. Senator Juneja, even if our funding creates some reform, if it results in innocent Americans perishing at the hands of the law, you have no choice but to affirm. We often hear that the mission of the police is to protect and to serve. But when the abuse of power comes at the expense of the protection of the people, our service to Americans must come through our policymaking.
Thank you, Senator Gu, for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. All those wishing to question, please raise your placards now. Senator Challery, start us off.
Hi there.
Thank you. Hi. So has the U.S. in the past ever cut 100% of federal funding?
No.
No, right? So if I cut like 5%, that's probably not enough of an incentive for a police department to go out and then
so
arrest
the difference
more
is,
people.
even though we've had some slight funding cuts in the past, we haven't compensated for that by increasing investment into community programs. And as I've shown you, these community programs are empirically proven to reduce crime.
Right. But let's talk about those community programs, right? Under today's piece of legislation, police still have all the algorithms they use for over-policing, right?
Exactly. And those algorithms rely on crime data. If crime decreases, they're not sent to
Right,
those
but
communities. That's the
Move
point.
to Senator Marothra.
Why can't we just limit police union contracts with departments?
I feel like that's legislation that we can definitely pass down in the future.
So if your only issue is the fact that police unions have too much power over police officers, why not just take that action?
Wait, that definitely isn't my biggest issue.
but,
I
like,
would argue that a vast majority of our federal funding also goes to things like armored vehicles and
So then
like
end the
police.
1033 program. Why a full legislation that ends all police officer funding?
Because a lot of it goes to places that we don't know where it goes. As the sponsor in today's
Well,
round
then
literally
increase
explained, we
oversight.
cannot have oversight
you,
over
Senator.
where every penny.
Thank you. For the last speech before the transition period into our next presiding officer, negation speakers, please raise your placard. Senator Reeser.
Thank you very much. That's Senator Reeser, R-E-A-S-E-R, representing the beautiful state of Virginia. I'm super thrilled to be here, and I'm just going to give the judges 10 or so seconds, and then I'll see if any are not ready, since I know there's a lot. All right, are there any judges who are not ready? Awesome. Police are tasked with upholding the laws of our democracy. So it seems ironic then that many of the policies surrounding police go against the will of the majority. And even if demilitarization is a popular policy in writing, stand with me to fail this legislation in practice simply because this bill doesn't touch militarization. Fail this bill because it instead targets community programs run by law enforcement, and because the affirmation fundamentally misunderstands the way that the federal government actually helps law enforcement. First, fail this legislation because it's law enforcement community and security programs, if anything, that take the hit when you pass this legislation. Let me be the first on either side to present a statistic that actually gives a holistic view of federal funding to local law enforcement, not just grants or some specific program. According to the American Action Program in September 29th, around 22% of government funding for police originated from the federal government. So effectively, this bill at most is issuing a 22% cut to police departments. And here's why that's a problem. According to USA Today on June 11th, it found that the police departments, when faced with funding cuts, overwhelmingly chose to cut valuable community and safety programs, not law enforcement personnel and equipment, to cover budget cuts. The programs that take a funding cut under this legislation are things like body cam funding or deadly force training, programs that none of us would want to see disappear, that would not be covered by Section 2. Senator Sun, if you want to talk about accountability, it's federal funding that makes accountability possible, and accountability for the police is far more important than the other categories of Section 2. Senator Martinez, it's better to have body cameras, period, than have them be reviewed very slowly than to not have body cameras at all. But I will concede a 22% budget cut is probably enough to reach things besides community programs in the vast majority of departments. So what happens then? Even if we take the affirmation at their highest ground against Senator Challery's ticket point, the law enforcement, police unions, and the future written by the president of the Combined Law Enforcement Association of Texas in 2017 estimates that around 80% of police officers are in a union. So in the vast majority of departments, one of two things happens. One, union contracts don't allow salary cuts, at least to this degree, so local governments shift discretionary funds to cover the deficit. Or two, unions threaten to go on strike, so local governments shift discretionary funds also to cover the deficit. In either case, any potential gain from redistributing law enforcement funds at a federal level is countered by the redistribution of funds at the local level, without even mentioning how rural, more conservative areas without unions would shift funds of their own free will. Overall, unions have a lot more power over local governments than the feds, so Senator Juneja's point about federal influence on unions is even stronger. In the best case, this bill is just a great money shuffle that has the same outcome. In the worst case, it's a partial cut to community and safety programs from law enforcement, in addition to being a money shuffle. But second, you fail this bill because the affirmation has mischaracterized the way, in practice, that federal governments actually help local law enforcement. Senator Wu tells you that the COPS program funds the purchasing of weapons and the impacts of that, and Senator Gu tells you that the federal government is uninvolved in police officer training. And I'm glad we brought this up because it seems the debate over today's legislation has lost its focus, which is militarization. According to the Department of Justice on 2021, the COPS grant is actually given to, quote, hire community policing professionals, develop and test innovative policing strategies, and provide training and technical assistance. The COPS program isn't the primary source of weapons from the feds. What is, according to the Defense Logistics Agency in 2021, is, according to them, the 1033 program, where police can get excess military-grade equipment. But here's the thing that no one has mentioned. The 1033 program is not an appropriations program because it gives excess weapons. Senators, I don't think that police should have tanks. I don't think that they should treat streets like battlefields, but this legislation doesn't change any of that. Fail.
Thank you, Senator Reeser, for that speech of 4 minutes and 7 seconds. All those wishing to question, please raise your placard. Senator Wu, start us off.
Thank you. So can you tell me what the COPS program has done for our communities?
Well, I told you in that quote with the Department of Justice.
You told me what the intention of the program is.
Right.
I told you in my speech that it has led to millions and millions of arrests of like low-level drug.
You can make that argument about any type of funding, right? Because local law enforcement, once they have the funding,
wait, it's uniquely these grants that enable them to criminalize populations and
if
communities.
cops are able to misuse funding, it doesn't matter what type of funding that is.
So why not take away 75% of it?
Because I already told you that's going to be made up.
Senator Brissett.
For how long has the COPS program and its funding been in effect?
I'm not sure.
For several decades, right?
Okay.
So that means we can sort of look at how effective it's been. So just tell me up or down to the following questions. In terms of misconduct allegations, have those gone up or down?
Here's the problem. Here's the problem with this argument. If if cops are able to misuse funds, it doesn't really matter which grant they're misusing.
Misuse the funds. I'm saying that even if they're using funds correctly, it's not effective. Have misconduct allegations gone up or down in the period that the COPS program has been in
I
effect?
would contend that holding cops more accountable is more important than cops.
But they aren't being held accountable.
Thank you. Before I hand the reins off to Senator Cow, I'd like to quickly make a couple points. First, for the sake of posterity, I'll continue keeping precedents on my spreadsheet and keep track of everything else. It's pasted back in the chat in case anyone wants to reference later on. And then just quickly, this will be the last session I'll ever be in high school congressional debate as a competitor. After 4 years, this is a very weird moment for me, but I'm very thankful to spend it with all of you. Done a great job thus far, and I'm really excited to see how the remainder of the session goes. I need to really quickly thank my parents for being so supportive over the last 4 years of me doing this activity. And a special thank you to William Apley, my teammate and close friend, helping me out through this tournament through the last few years. It's been great competing with you. I'm excited to do PF with you at Nationals, but Congress has really been the place where I've seen you grow. I'm so excited to see what you do next year. He's a junior. You guys still have to deal with him. And thank you all. With that in mind, good luck to the competitors. Good luck to my fellow senators who will be presiding. Senator Tong last, but now, Senator Cow, take us away.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Hey everyone, once again, this is Senator Jacob Cow. Last name is spelled C-A-O and pronounced like the animal. And I'm honored to be your second round presiding officer for this final session. So as to not interrupt the flow of debate too much, I'm just going to quickly run through my differing timing procedures. For speeches, I'm going to give you a green 3 minutes. I'm going to give you a yellow 3 minutes and 30 seconds. and I'm going to give you a red 3 minutes and 55 seconds. In contrast to the previous PO, I'm not going to count you down from 3:50. I'm going to count you down starting with 10 at 4 minutes, down to 4 minutes and 10 seconds. At 4 minutes and 10 seconds, I'm going to verbally cut you off following the standard TOC grace period. In terms of questions, I will be giving you a C at 20 seconds, and I will count you down when you have 5 seconds remaining. I will verbally announce when question time has elapsed. I'm also going to be calling on questioners one at a time. So once again, please hold your placard up throughout other questioning blocks if you would still like to question. Precedence and recency has already been established, and here's my precedence and recency chart in the chat. Please let me know if there's any sharing issues with that. And once again, if you do need to leave the chamber, just please make sure to do so between speeches so as to maintain respect for your fellow competitors. Points of personal privilege can still be made in the chat or out loud, but do note that if your camera is off, we will assume that you have left the chamber and we will proceed as such. Are there any questions about my procedures? If not, we will resume debate on Finals Bill C regarding demilitarization. Our last speech was a speech in the negation, so I'm now calling upon a speech in the affirmation. Speakers, raise a hand or placard. Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. That's Mr. Mazumdar, spelled Mazumdar, or as you see on my Zoom screen, the exact same way. I think we have 8 judges. Just if I see an array of thumbs up, then I'll assume that everyone's ready. Okay. Just pin our PO real quick. In every American household, kids get some version of the talk. A lot of you are cringing right now because you remember awkward conversations about the birds and the bees. But for some of us, the talk is more sinister. It's the conversation that kids of color have with their parents about what to do when interacting with the police officer to avoid becoming the next statistic, the next news story, the next name on a picket sign. I want my kids to grow up in a world where I don't have to give them that talk. That's a world that can only exist if we affirm. In all the technicalities of today's debate, we've lost sight of our priority. The side that wins today's round is the side that proves that it helps our constituents the most. I've got 4 minutes to go through every single argument brought up so far and prove why, in the end, the affirmation benefits our constituents the most. Let's get started. So far, my side of the affirmation has dealt exclusively in hypotheticals. Senator Wu talked about funding social workers. Senator Sun said community specialists will reduce crime. Senator Martinez said that $2 billion appropriated will help us regulate body cams. But sections 2 and 3 show you that those impacts only come to fruition if our colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee and the Department of Justice decide to fund the same community programs and body camera inspectors that we assume. Since no one on my side has provided evidence to support that our colleagues are in alignment with us, those impacts are purely hypothetical. Allow me to move away from those and be the first affirmative speaker to provide the solvency for this bill. Here's why cutting federal funding is the only solution to restructuring our justice system. Pass this bill because federal police grants disproportionately target Black Americans. According to a University of Southern California study in 2017, for every $100 increase in federal police grants, drug arrests increased by 22 per 100,000 white residents, but 101 per every 100,000 Black residents. That's a near 80% disparity. This government is directly complicit in the over-policing of Black communities because our federal grants enable police officers to prey on minorities at disproportionate rates. Second, this legislation eliminates federal appropriations like the 1033 program, which sends military weapons to local police departments. Here's why that's so critical. According to a 2017 report from Stanford Psychology Department, sending the maximum amount of military equipment to police departments leads to a 129% increase in civilian deaths. When we pass this bill and eliminate our grants, we stop financing a justice system which targets our most vulnerable and kills civilians in confrontations. So now let's take a look at the negations arguments. Senator Juneja explained how we need federal funding because it allows us to negotiate police reform. A few responses. First, this legislation amounts to us actually using our leverage because we eliminate federal funds until police change their behavior. If they restructure adequately, there's no reason we can't reinstitute grants in the future. But second, even if we lose all of our leverage, I'd argue that in a world where police are killing civilians with impunity, that leverage hasn't really been helpful so far, and it's not necessary today. Senator Marotra, you said that police officers are preventing robberies and thefts, but a Brookings report in June of last year says that 90% of police calls are nonviolent. They don't need hundreds of billions of dollars to respond to those. That leaves Senator Reeser. He says that local governments will have to shift funds to appease unions. Even if that's the case, the affirmation outweighs on magnitude. The impact of eliminating over-policing and hyper-criminalization of Black communities, compounded with the 129% decrease in civilian deaths by demilitarization, vastly outweighs any marginal underfunding and that we can target in the future to solve. At the beginning of my speech, I told you the side who wins today's debate is the one that helps our constituents. The affirmation world is safer for our most vulnerable. Think of Mr. Goo's citizens, afraid of when the police stop them at the middle of traffic. Think of my Black neighbors in Brooklyn who can't go running without fearing of their lives. Give them a chance to experience what American liberty is about and pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, that goes to Senator Yoon.
I think the chair. So, Senator, when you pass this this legislation, does military police funding actually go down?
The main way of doing that is appropriations under the 1033 program, and that is directly
Correct. Right. So, do these police departments just not respond and try to make funds elsewhere, or do they just accept this loss?
So I would argue that nothing can really replace federal funding since it is so expansive. It's 40% of it.
Okay, so if I can prove to you my speech that they do replace it, then would you vote with me?
Well, at least the federal government
Senators.
is financing.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Reeser.
How much money is fiscally appropriated to local law enforcement through the 1033 program?
So money isn't appropriated, but it's military weapons that are reappropriated from the Department of Defense.
That's not actually what appropriated means in the federal government.
Okay, we can argue
providing
about
excess weapons to local law enforcement does not come under the umbrella of appropriations or funding in any federal legislation.
That's fine. And we can argue about the semantics of that later. The fact of the matter is we give police money to arrest Black citizens under federal grants. That doesn't change unless
Thank you, Senators. Question time has now elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech in affirmation, I call for a speech in negation. Negation speakers, please raise a hand or placard. Senator Yoon, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair for the recognition. Senator Yoon, spelled Y-O-O-N, rhymes with moon, tune, or even baboon, I guess. Is anybody not ready at this point in the debate? And I go by any pronouns. Just verbal objections, or I'll just get into it. Wonderful. The basis of our judicial system has always been rooted in racism and prejudice, and it only becomes worse in the affirmative world. I will not stand for making a corrupt system even worse, even more discriminatory, and even more racist. Stand with me to fail and to turn the tide. I come from a poor, predominantly immigrant Title I public high school in an area where absolutely irresponsible policing and mistreatment of people of color has been a long-standing problem. I'm not going to challenge the status quo problems that Senator Wu tells us about because I don't support massive militarization. Where this goes wrong is its implementation because this legislation is simply insolvent. The most important point in this debate that no one's mentioned is that this bill causes mass civil asset forfeiture. Senator Mazumdar asked Senator Wu in questioning, what happens to departments if we pull this funding? 3 words, civil asset forfeiture. The American Civil Liberties Union explains in 2021, civil asset forfeiture is the process of police seizing property that was involved in crime. Dubbed the, quote, most corrupt process not seen by the public by the NAACP, civil asset forfeiture looks something like this. Say I'm a police officer that arrests someone. I handcuff the person in question and, importantly, confiscate their property both around them and on them, maybe a wallet, a cell phone, anything that might be tangentially related to the crime. Common practice, right? What most Americans don't know is where this confiscated property goes. See, some of the time, it's just returned at the station. But far too often, this property goes into civil asset forfeiture, where this property is sold to fund police departments. Why is this so bad? Because as CNBC tells us in June 2020, the majority of this property seized during arrests are property from innocent people. Legally, police have the right to take this at first, but you have a right to reclaim it. But in practice, because of a huge gap in accountability, as the Southern Poverty Law Center furthers in 2017, once property enters the civil asset forfeiture track, 90% of the time, when they have a legal right to it, it isn't returned to innocent people. Here's how this is relevant to this round. As the Institute for Justice details in December 2020, when police departments are defunded, they increase civil asset forfeiture proportionally so they can steal the property of innocent people who are the majority of the time are people of color to refund their budgets as supervisors tell them to exploit this legal loophole. But crucially, the data analyzed by the IFJ specifically notes that in recent years, civil asset forfeiture has confiscated over $68.8 billion of innocent property, which is the biggest empiric this round. This matters so much because every dollar that we defund is just stolen back through this process, disaffecting people of color. Senator Chalouri on my own side briefly talks about the reaction from police departments and describes this as increased arrests and tickets to reinstitute funding. But as the Brookings Institute notes in January 2019, arrests and tickets can be tracked and bring in too little revenue. On the contrary, because civil asset forfeiture isn't tracked and because you can collect thousands of dollars at once, there is a huge proportional spike, dollar by dollar, when you defund the police. The reason I bring up a new point this late in the debate is because of its sheer magnitude. Here, let's clash the opponents and show you why this matters so much. First, Senators Wu and Martinez tell us that this is the way to deconstruct militarization. Cross-apply my sole argument to this. Every dollar that we defund from these police departments will be a dollar reclaimed by police departments through this process, and you see no net loss in militarization funding. Then Senator Gu tells us that predictive policing is really bad. I don't disagree. This is simply non-unique. You can set better predictive policing standards without increasing civil asset forfeiture. After, Senator Sun tells us that no funding loss argument on our side does anything to outweigh his wing. But I tell you that the academic consensus is every time we defund a dollar, police departments don't just accept it. They directly just reclaim that dollar. The same to Senator Mazumdar. Your impact relies on the police budget actually going down, which I prove doesn't happen. You simply can't fix an institutionally broken system overnight. Trying to pass this large of a magnitude will only hurt people of color, and that's why I'm going to negate today.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 9 seconds. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Gu.
When lower arrest rates mean there are less police patrolling the street corners of minority communities, doesn't this mean civil asset forfeiture decreases?
No, not exactly, because civil asset forfeiture only happens when arrests happen, right?
Right, and exactly. I proved to you in my speech that, sure.
So the IFJ evidence specifically states that arrests also go up proportionally, so they can—
Why? I give you 3 meta-analyses that prove that the community investments that we create under this legislation decrease arrests.
So community investments prevent crime because they help people, right? I tell you that money's just—
Yeah, so the algorithms send less police there.
It's non-unique in its core, right? It's just non-unique because it's stolen right back.
Why? We
Thank you,
actively
Senators.
create those programs.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Martinez.
So I want to continue that line of questioning. Police don't just randomly come up to a person with a specific interest in that specific person. They're often patrolling neighborhoods and have beyond a reasonable doubt that that person has committed a crime. If there's less need to patrol—
The reason why there's no less need is because your link there is weird, right? You're saying that like these investments and like, no, poverty— wait, let me answer. Poverty causes crime, right? I'm saying that poverty doesn't decrease because you're taking that money right back out of community investments by
you're
stealing
putting
that
more money into officers that have no jurisdiction.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Senators. Question time has now elapsed. Just a quick reminder, in the Zoom format, we cannot hear either of you if you are both talking at the same time. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, I now call for a speech in the affirmation. Affirmative speakers, please raise a hand or placard. Senator Lin.
I thank the chair that Senator Lin, just spelled L-I-N. Whenever y'all are ready, I'll be good to go. Awesome. Awesome. Great, great. Awesome. I think that's everyone. To be quite honest, I don't trust this Congress to make change. I don't know if we'll pass the solution, and I especially don't know if we'll ever pass one in the near future. And I don't think it's unfounded to feel this way. When you wish for change year after year and are met with pittances each time, you're justified in distrusting the very system offering you these false promises. Americans are justified in fundamentally distrusting their police. Senator Juneja, I know you don't like assigning blame, but it will be our fault if you continue to turn a blind eye to the problem. Why? Because federal funding in it and of itself is counterproductive to police reform. There are 2 main ideas spouted by the negation. The first is that federal grants will end up subsidizing reform. This is told to you by Senator Marotra, Juneja, and Reeser. Here's why that's not the case. Rachel Harmon, a professor of law and director of the Center for Criminal Justice, in June of 2020 explains that federal grant and equipment programs for policing are often designed in ways that incentivize harmful policing and undermine local and state political accountability. The US Congress and the executive branch have not comprehensively reviewed the goals of these grants in more than 25 years, during which time academics have wisely documented the failures of tough crime-on-crime approaches. When Senator Telluri tells you about community training investments, that's the exact opposite of what you want. The goal is to stop police and community interactions as much as possible. So let's look to what our appropriations actually have been in the past. The increased militarization and aggression of our police. Remember what Senator Wu first told you at the beginning of his speech. The vast majority of our funds fall into one of two categories, JAG funding or COPS, the former which militarizes the police, and the latter which trains police on entering into communities, oftentimes leading to aggressive actions. The Human Rights Watch in July of 2020 also explains that our other appropriations, like the 1033 program and the 1122 program, have similar negative effects. These are appropriations, Senator Reeser, because they fall in the definition of sums of funds or items given by the federal government to these departments. But instead, the negation banks the entirety of their impact on the minority of funding. Here are two reasons why the affirmation still outweighs. LJ Krivo-Rukers from the University of Rutgers in 2016 explains both. First, community reinvestment. Through Section 2, we have the ability to decrease violent crime 3 times more than additional funding directly to the police. That's what Senator Sun and Senator Gu told you. But second, a worse funded police force is good because the less ability they have to actually send their officers out into the community is always going to be a net benefit for them. But the second idea the negation tells you is that they have this vague idea of oversight, keeping the police accountable. Here is my one question for the negation. What has federal oversight granted us? Because as far as I can see, on a daily basis, the police continue to abuse their citizens, and this government continues to not hold them accountable. Senator Turley tells us that this is only going to lead to increased arrests, and Senator Yoon tells us that civil asset forfeitures are going to be the way that they get funding in the end. On their highest ground, with their level of federal oversight, you have a marginal opportunity to potentially reform the police. But why does an opportunity matter if we've never reformed them before? Here is where the affirmation's impacts far outweigh anything the negation has provided for you, because we actually implement oversight in this bill. Look to Section 3, where we hire personnel and time towards holding state governments accountable in decreasing mass criminalization. That means people on the ground and inside legislators that are keeping the police and state departments accountable to make sure that excessive arrests don't happen anymore. But everything that we've said is grounded in reality. It's going to happen once you pass this bill. I'm much more willing to bank my vote on that rather than the hypotheticals of the opposition. False promises have real consequences. Pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Yoon.
I thank the chair. So, Senator, civil asset forfeiture at its core is stealing from innocent people through legal loopholes. I tell you that every dollar defunded is a dollar reclaimed through this process, which isn't a hypothetical. If your link between like making a better world is to reduce militarization, and that doesn't happen, where's your impact?
Yeah, I'm telling you that things like that are only solved through oversight, right? You increase oversight on our side. That's why
Okay, so your oversight link is one thing. Your oversight link is that we hire people. Why can't we do that without increasing CAF?
Because I think that the police should be defunded.
Right, you can write a
Thank you,
different bill.
Senators. Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator. So nobody on the affirmation has addressed that if we take away funding, we empower police unions. If we empower police unions, how do any of your impacts of reform get met?
You don't empower police unions by taking away federal funding. You even in yourself said that police unions act independent of the federal government. There's no link there.
Yes, because they control localities. We're the only independent regulator of police unions. If we take away our power and empower police unions, how do we reform anything?
We don't regulate police unions or even departments. That's why
Right.
no regulations for unions.
Grants we have. I said to you, Biden's grant.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Senators. Question time has elapsed. I now call upon our final speech in the negation. Senator Brissett.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon now, everyone. My name is Senator Ben Brissett, initially seeking to speak in the affirmation, now speaking in the negation. I'll just begin in a few seconds unless there's any objection from any of my judges. Perfect. For 3 days, we've debated nearly every imaginable matter of policy. For 3 weeks, thousands of miles away in Minneapolis, argument after argument has been made in the trial of Derek Chauvin. In around 3 hours, closing arguments in the trial will be finished, and in 3 minutes, so too will my speech and today's debate. So as the trial and today's debate both come to a close with the tap of a gavel, let's not forget just how far it can echo. Fail. But first, let's address this point of solvency, because the points of solvency in this round have revolved entirely around oversight from Senator Mehrotra, accountability from Senators Junija and Gu, and use of force. All three of these points are impacted when we pass, because understand that according to the Urban Institute in June of last year, roughly 2/3 of all police funding in the United States goes towards payroll expenses, meaning that defunding is more likely to cut into the paychecks received by officers than it is to reduce community encounters with police or the weaponry they choose to deploy. Senator Mehrotra importantly proves to us that when we pass, police use of force increases because accountability dissipates when we no longer contribute a dime to police salaries and benefits. And no affirmative speaker so far has effectively responded to this central claim. Here's why that matters. One Harvard study from June of last year finds that community exposure to more police violence, more uses of force among Black and Hispanic youth leads to persistent decreases in GPA, increased incidents of emotional disturbance, and lower rates of high school completion and college enrollment. Our students of color suffer when their communities are inundated with uses of force. In other words, when you pass, eliminate funding, cede our leverage, and police begin to act with more of the impunity that Senator Mazumdar worries about in his speech, we actually see use of force increase. Senator Reeser references cuts to federal reform programs, but here's why that matters. The American Psychological Association explains in October of last year that in Seattle, officers trained in a procedural justice intervention designed in part by psychologists and with funding from the federal government used force up to 40% less than they did before initiating these reform programs that were directly facilitated by the COPS program, whose funding we seek to eliminate by passing today's legislation. These are just a few examples of the work the field is doing to address police brutality. So Senator Lynn, when you say we've never reformed the police before, this is clearly refuted by every single example of local reform that has been implemented thanks to federal funding for programs that have proven impacts on use of force. You, Senator Sun, Senator Gu, and countless others keep referencing these reductions in crime that come from Section 2. I say it's far preferable to stick with the solutions that we know release the oppressive grip of policing from our most vulnerable communities, and that's federally guided reforms. But next, let's move to this point of efficacy, because Senator Wu talks about how military gear, weapons, and body armor go away if we pass because JAG grants disappear. But understand that in no way can this happen when they've already obtained hundreds of thousands of pieces of military-grade equipment and stockpiled it. CNBC explains in September of 2014 that more than 60% of military-grade equipment currently held by local law enforcement is not new and has been held for years or even decades, meaning that stopping future transfers does nothing to produce solvency if local law enforcement already has this equipment. Senator Gu then repeats this misconception in questioning with Senator Mehrotra when he worries about funding for armored vehicles. But if the existing stock of military-grade equipment isn't what takes a hit when we pass, what does? So they'll still invest in tear gas, assault rifles, and armored vehicles. But the very first thing that goes is pay. The LA Times explains in December of last year that last year, Los Angeles weighed layoffs of 951 police officers in the midst of budget cuts. And the San Francisco Examiner in February of this year continues to explain that meanwhile, San Francisco police have contemplated laying off 11% of all officers. In other words, layoffs always come before all of the other equipment that police use when their tactics become tasers, guns, handcuffs, and knees on necks. 3 days, 3 weeks, and now 3 minutes. Choose wisely. Justice is depending on it. Fail.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Would you say that police unions are powerful?
Yes.
And they have some political influence over police departments as well?
Absolutely.
So why would they let 11% of all of their officers take wage cuts or be fired?
Because that's already happening in cities that have defunded the police. I told you about San Francisco. I told you about Los Angeles. They aren't all powerful. They have some power, but they can't stop those immediate cuts.
So you're betting that unions will let police departments fire their officers in droves when we pass this bill?
Unions prefer that the military-grade equipment that they deploy on a regular basis is able to be maintained.
Senator Lynn.
Hi, so what's stopping state legislators and city councils from continuing to pass reforms that you say are so successful?
Well, the problem there is that they don't have the immense kind of financial resources that come from the COPS program. It's tens of billions of dollars that's funneled to these jurisdictions. So if we cut that funding, especially in COVID-19, when these states are experiencing revenue shortfalls, we can't just expect that they're going to fill in the gaps.
So the national government does spend a lot, but state and local governments spend 2 times as much. Isn't that a lot more funding?
And they're currently experiencing budget shortfalls. I don't think they're going to fill
Thank
the
you,
gap.
senators. Question time has now elapsed. Seeing as everyone has had a chance to speak on this legislation, are there any motions? Senator Juneja.
I move to previous question.
Is there a second? All in favor, please raise a hand or placard. Seeing as that clearly passes our 2/3 majority, we will move to previous question. All in favor of passing Finals Bill C regarding demilitarization, please raise a hand or placard at this time. I count 6. All in favor of defeating this legislation, please raise a hand or placard at this time. I also count 6. Seeing as that is a tie, the chair must break it, and I hand this one to the affirmation. My congratulations, Senator Wu. Are there any other motions at this time? Senator Razor.
I move for a 10-minute recess.
Is there a second? Seeing as that is a unanimous vote, we will move to a 10-minute recess. Please reconvene at 12:50 p.m. Central Time. We now have just over 1 minute remaining in the recess, so if everyone could start to come back so we can get round started, that would be great. This recess has now elapsed. Judge Kleinley and Judge Adeyemi, have you both returned?
Yep, sorry, I didn't realize I turned my camera back off.
Me neither, I never left.
No worries. Seeing as all of our competitors and judges have returned, I now call the session back into order at 1:51 p.m. Eastern Time. Our next item on the agenda is Finals Bill A, titled the Baby Act. If there are no motions at this time, I now call for a 3-minute sponsorship speech. Once again, debate must commence with a 3-minute sponsorship. I apologize, a 4-minute sponsorship speech. Are there any motions? Senator Yoon.
I motion for like a quick 30-second in-house recess.
Is there a second? All in favor, please raise a hand or placard. Seeing as that clearly passes the 1/2 majority, 30-second in-house recess granted.
I can write one really quickly if we need to. I just need the rest of the 30 seconds.
Okay, and then I think other than that, right, only one other person switched to an egg, so we should be completely balanced from here on out, right? Okay, great.
Also, is anyone planning on speaking on NIMBY, or are we just gonna wrap it up with this one?
That's a good question.
All right, cool, good to know.
I was probably planning to speak on NIMBY, but I made a judgment call and prepped Baby during the recess, so I'm just gonna speak on broadband.
Our 30-second recess has now elapsed. I'm once again calling for a 4-minute sponsorship speech. Senator Lin, you stand unopposed.
Hi, everyone. That's Senator Lin, just spelled L-I-N. I was the 11th speaker on the previous bill, if that helps. Whenever y'all are ready. Awesome, awesome. Awesome, great. I think that's everyone. Awesome. No matter how old you are, or no matter what your job is, everyone has been affected by this last year's pandemic, but perhaps no more so than the children within our school system. Reverting from in-person classrooms to purely online education hasn't been an easy process, but it's been even harder and even more difficult for those who can't afford broadband internet access or to go to the classroom and to get an education. Education is the most important tool for our youth and our children. It's the only way to break cycles of poverty and to uplift people into success. That's why I need to pass my legislation today. So what's the problem in the status quo? The Pew Research Center in April of 2020 explains that since the pandemic began, nearly half of all parents with lower income students say it's very likely, or at least somewhat likely, that their children will have to do school on a cell phone. That's at 43% of school children. And 40% also reported the same likelihood of their children having to go to public usages, for example, libraries or even stores, to finish their schoolwork because there isn't any reliable internet connection at home whatsoever. 1/3 of them say it's at least somewhat likely that their children aren't going to be able to complete their schoolwork at all because they don't have access to broadband internet service at home. The RAND Corporation in April 2020 compounds on this, saying that 75% of teachers, as a result, see students lacking access to high-speed internet connection, and that becomes a serious obstacle to effective implementation of remote learning. Point blank, poor and low-income students who don't have routers in their home or who don't have the infrastructure around them to allow them to access these online classrooms or even the homework in general can't complete their education. They haven't been being able to attend classes, they haven't been able to do tests, and they haven't been able to complete assignments. But why is this so harmful? It's because the University of Pennsylvania, in a publication from April of 2019, explains that access to education, and specifically getting a high school degree for low-income students, is the best way to increase social mobility for people who want to exit their homes and communities or other rural and remote locations. Without it, it's significantly harder for them to be able to get a higher paying job and as well to be able to go to college or get a higher education in general. You're cutting off access when students can't access the classroom. So what does my legislation do? We bring broadband internet access to everyone. 3 reasons why. The first is in today's legislation. Section 2 details how we're going to be implementing an income tax that's the exact amount that it would take to build infrastructure or for consumers and American constituents with a child in a K-12 public school program to be able to afford this broadband internet access. That income tax credit would go directly off of the federal taxes on their income tax that they pay yearly. It wouldn't be a difficult thing to do, and it's highly implementable. But second, you also see companies being incentivized to build infrastructure in rural or remote locations when they have a guarantee of profit and security. According to data from the Federal Communications Commission, 39% of people living in rural areas in the United States lack access to high-speed broadband. Why? Because there aren't enough potential customers in rural communities. As a result, rural communities have the fewest options for internet service providers because companies have less of an incentive to build out expensive networks in areas with a lower probability of being able to access them in the first place, which is why there's no guarantee that they have them in the status quo. This bill fundamentally changes that decision calculus for these corporations because now they know that the federal government is directly subsidizing this and is going to be able to pay them when it comes to these tax credits, and that lower income people in these rural areas are going to be able to afford these bills in the first place. You see increased infrastructure, and you see people actually being able to access their education and access high-speed internet once you pass. That's why I'm so proud to sponsor.
Thank you, Senator. For that speech of 4 minutes and 4 seconds, we are now in line for 4 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Racer.
Hi, Senator. So even if more rural consumers are willing to purchase broadband, is there enough rural customers, like period, for broadband companies to justify building infrastructure there?
Right. So I'm not going to pretend that like every single rural community in America is suddenly going to get access, but the incentive is much higher that didn't exist before. Because there's a lower population density, corporations aren't secure that everyone's going to be able to afford the bills. Now they have that guarantee.
But my point is, do you have statistics that prove that even if all rural people were buying broadband, that it would still be enough?
Thank you, senators. Senator Sun.
Does this bill cover the cost of computers or other equipment?
No, it covers the internet access.
It does not. Why? And this bill is a tax credit, right? Not a direct discount.
Right. So it goes off of their federal taxes.
When they file for taxes each April. So they only get it once they file their taxes, right?
Yeah.
For all the passion that you have on the affirmation, why is this solution so moderate? It's literally a tax credit that doesn't cover equipment. Like, why are we not more universal here?
More students have equipment than they do internet access, like cell phones, for example.
Thank you, senators. Senator Gu.
Right now, who provides the majority of rural internet? Is it big ISPs or small ISPs?
A combination of both, but mostly big because they can afford it.
Actually, it's primarily the small ones because you yourself said that the big ones don't even want to go there. And who's more likely to monopolize the industry, the big ones or the small ones?
Probably the big ones.
Exactly. So what's going to happen to the people who don't have children, the people in the rural areas that now have increasingly high rates of internet?
Wait, no. For rural areas that already have small corporations, they would continue that access. For those that don't have
Why? You yourself conceded that the big ones are going to be able to go there and push
senators.
the small.
Senator Mehrotra.
What happens to families that have split, separated, or divorced parents?
It would go to the parent with primary custody of the child.
What if they have joint custody?
Then it would go to both of them.
And if they file separately, how do you anticipate that they manage those costs?
Well, it's not like filing for the
So
grant.
aren't you encouraging like nuclear families, the ones that have two parents together, to be able to have access to broadband today?
No, it just goes off of their income taxes.
Then why not just give them the like a voucher to do that instead of a tax credit?
It would be the same thing. You're doing the same
No,
thing.
it's not.
Thank you, Senators. Question time has now elapsed. Seeing as that was our first affirmation speech, I now call upon our first negation speech. Speakers, please raise a hand or placard. Once again, we must have one full cycle of debate before we flip. Are there any negation speakers? That goes to Senator Mehrotra on recency.
Hi, that's Senator Divya Mehrotra, spelled Mehrotra. A little bit earlier than I expected, but absolutely all right. Just give me a smile or nod whenever you're ready. And for the judge whose camera's a little bit shaky, virtual reactions were just as great.
Awesome. I'll just say it verbally. I'm totally ready.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Just making sure. And PO, I'm assuming you're always ready like the first one. If there's one thing I dislike, it's this Congress's willingness to always categorize our country into basically one category, whether it's identifying with mostly white males or identifying with a nuclear family. Our tax codes and our policies are written to influence only one group. That's why my cross-examination period with Representative Lynn was so important to me. It wasn't just her speech, but it's the idea that this Congress has consistently prioritized some groups over others. Unfortunately, today's legislation doesn't do anything to resolve that. It only perpetuates that problem. Don't pass misguided policy just for the sake of accomplishing something. Pass something that matters. Fail today's legislation. But first, I want to contest her entire assumption about what's happening in the status quo. She characterizes every family with a K-12 dependent as lacking access to broadband. Let's contest her assumption right there. It actually doesn't help low-income Americans because most people with K-12 dependents aren't even low income in the first place. The Center for American Progress on January 12th of 2021 tells us that 14.9% of children between the ages of 6 and 11 and 12.9% of children between the ages 12 and 17 actually live in poverty. That's what you would characterize as low income. So the individuals who need the income tax credits aren't getting it. But how many families above the poverty line actually have K-12 dependents? That same article tells us that more than 60% of children live in a household that's considered middle or high income. So I want to characterize a little bit of a discrepancy here. She characterizes her entire speech as being the savior of every low-income child that exists in the United States. That's categorically false. You can't advocate for something that you're not accomplishing. But what's the net harm of giving more money in income tax credits to middle and high income families who can afford to take the brunt immediately? That's when you turn to Senator Sun's entire advocacy in his cross-examination period with Senator Lynn. The people that can handle a direct cost for some time and then get the money back in an income tax credit are only middle and high income families. Those who suffer in the meantime are the low income families that Senator Lynn talks about. But what's the net harm of giving money back to middle and high income families who can already afford broadband access? Broadband providers are going to raise their prices. It's a little bit of a natural phenomenon known as supply and demand. So let's take ourselves through a bit of an economics lecture. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on January 25th of 2021 explains that charges by cable companies have increased by 250%, coming in the past maybe 20 years. But that has come out to be about 3.9% per year. Why they do that is because every time someone else can access more of their resources, they increase the price as well. So if you're imagining that supply and demand graph, every time demand goes up, the equilibrium price goes up as well. But how does today's legislation worsen that problem? Because you increase demand, particularly from high income and middle income families. The Pew Research Center on April 7th of 2021 explains that 92% of high income individuals use broadband in comparison to 57% of low income individuals. It's a statistic you heard from Representative Lynn. Let's flip that statistic on her. The reason why today's legislation particularly helps high income individuals is that it's just a nice gift to them to pay off of their costs. Now, when broadband companies see that their costs are being paid off, they're more willing to jack up the price so that more people and the government have to pay that off. You're just pushing that equilibrium price higher and higher. Higher income individuals can pay it off. Lower income individuals are pushed out of the broadband market again and again. I hate the fact that we consistently prioritize people that don't need our help in the first place. Actually act for individuals, pass something like a voucher. Feel today's legislation.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 4 seconds. We are now in line for 4 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, that goes to Senator Brissett.
So your point of price increases relies on this assumption that demand is going to increase among middle and high income families, correct?
Yeah.
But don't these families already access the internet? So the demand is already there, right?
Not all of them.
But most of them, right? Why do we assume that if they have the financial capital to access it now, but they're not, why does that change if we pass the credit?
So 2 responses. First is that the remaining ones that haven't been using it will increase their demand. The second is that—
Why do they increase their demand?
Can I finish the second response? Now that the companies see that we're willing to pay off those costs, they'll jack up the price naturally.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Martinez.
All right, I want to continue that line of questioning. Sure. So it doesn't really make sense to me that people who are already paying for the internet are now going to turn to tax income credits that might not cover everything they want in their plans, because if
why won't it cover everything that's in their plans?
Right, because people who already have the financial stability to pay for these—
Why? I would take free money. I would take free money.
Have the financial stability to do so. Because
I would take free money. You're telling me you wouldn't take free money from the government?
No, because I could already pay for it. Why would I want
No, I would take free money any day. I think that just
you
differs from
have to reach qualification standards. Those people aren't going
Thank
to—
you, Senators. Senator Chellery. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you. There's a lot of ISPs in the United States, right?
No.
There's more than one company who provides internet.
AT&T
right?
and Comcast. That's it.
Wait, there's multiple small ISPs, but let's go off that,
AT&T
right?
and Comcast dominate the market.
Taking your argument at its highest ground, if a company jacks up its prices that high, what happens if another company brings them lower? Everybody's going to flock to that one corporation, right?
AT&T and Comcast are the monopolies, and they've basically beat out any local ISP.
Natural competition is always going to bring those prices
but when
down
you have a
because
monopoly,
nobody's going to buy their service otherwise, right?
Competition doesn't beat monopolies.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Wu.
I have a similar line of questioning. If you have a smaller ISP, I want to talk about this competition idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're undercutting the big companies' prices and they're the only ISP that a low-income constituent can afford, how does it not increase demand to those small ISPs?
That's when you turn to local government policies, like in localities that have basically banned the creation of local ISPs in the first place.
So there's no small ISPs that can provide affordable
There are very,
rates.
very few that lack the power to beat out AT&T and Comcast.
This bill empowers them by sending more people their way, does it not?
Because you can't beat AT&T and Comcast.
Thank you, Senators. Question time has now elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech in negation, I now call for a speech in affirmation. Affirmative speakers, please raise a hand or placard. Senator Brissett, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Senator Ben Brissett. I'll be speaking in the affirmation of today's legislation. Again, I'm going to wait 3 seconds, and if I don't get any indication that my judges aren't ready, I will begin. Perfect. Cacti the size of street poles, dust storms that cover the vast expanses of the earth, and heat waves that concentrate the intensity of the sun directly onto all who pass through on foot. The map of our nation is dotted with digital deserts, spaces where broadband connection is few and far between, and investment costs, like the temperatures of a real desert, are high and intense. But thankfully, today's legislation represents an oasis behind the palms, so pass to avoid leaving our most vulnerable constituents parched. But first, as we're traveling through the desert, we might want to look at the cracks underfoot and check who's fallen into them. Senator Sun asked Senator Lin about a lack of universality, but what he misses is that it's based on K-12 school participation and income taxes. This legislation, in effect, is universal. Here's why that matters. The Migration Policy Institute in January of this year explained that 9.3 million undocumented immigrants who were otherwise eligible for benefits under the CARES Act were blocked from accessing them simply due to their immigration status. And they're also ineligible to apply for federal programs that provide cash and food assistance. Senator Mayrotra goes back and forth with me and Senator Martinez just now about this idea of middle and high income consumers benefiting. I say that even if we accept that that's true, undocumented immigrants getting the credits matters much more. But how do we know they get the credits? The Pew Research Center explains in November of 2016 that as of publication, roughly 3.9 million K-12 students enrolled in both public and private schools in the United States are estimated to be children of undocumented immigrants. But let's move next to the question of moral desert, because the Center for American Progress explains in December of last year that more than 5 million undocumented immigrants are keeping this country moving forward as essential workers during the pandemic in critical industries like agriculture, food delivery, and meat packing, and 6 million undocumented immigrants pay income taxes. So since those who work pay income taxes, those with children are able to access the benefits provided by today's legislation because they meet the eligibility requirements. That's critical. And when it comes time to vote, let's at least have the dignity to reimburse our undocumented population for the cost of securing a brighter future for their children. A green card can never account for that. But let's look next at what's faded into the dust storm as today's legislation incentivizes increased broadband infrastructure, and as Senator Mayrotra and Senator Lynn have gone back and forth on this point of investment. But let's understand why this happens, because the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers in July of last year explains that in just one quarter, AT&T reported a net loss of 102,000 home broadband subscribers, including 159,000 past due accounts, meaning hundreds of thousands of subscribers lost access simply due to cost or an inability to pay their internet bills. That means that the bottom line of these ISPs is taking a hit. Senator Mayrotra again worries about increases in price because demand from high and middle income individuals increases. My response is that they already have internet, so demand doesn't change. But what does change? These ISPs will now have more money to continue their existing pending upgrades and investment that have been threatened as a result of less revenue from people not being able to maintain their subscriptions. The Electronic Frontier Foundation explains in April of last year that the more than 3 million Americans currently stuck in DSL internet slow lanes could quickly be upgraded to much faster, far superior fiber without a dime in direct subsidies if upfront investment costs were reduced. And when we allow more people to access the internet, when we allow for subscription to go back to where it was pre-pandemic, that means that upfront investment costs are accounted for. These providers have a clear-cut incentive to invest in broadband expansion and improvement, because when they do, they secure access to new consumer networks and improve the ones they have. So senators, let's exit the desert, head straight for the oasis, and pass today's legislation before we're overcome by a dust storm of unaffordability. Pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes exactly. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Yoon.
I think the chair. So, Senator, why is it best to give them a Wi-Fi credit?
Well, it's best to give them a Wi-Fi credit because that ensures that investment in existing upgrades to broadband are able to be
just pure cash.
Because we've already done that through stimulus checks, and those stimulus checks have been allocated in equity, as I explained in my first contention. Undocumented immigrants can't access stimulus checks because
no. I'm not talking about stimulus checks. I'm talking about different incomes, right? You can give people cash aid even when they're undocumented immigrants.
Sure.
Why don't you give them cash aid?
Thank you, senators. Thank you, Senator. Senator Mayrotra.
Let's take ourselves through a bit of an example. If the government gives you $200 to pay off your broadband, what is the company going to do?
That's a big jump. The government is giving me $200. What is the company going to do?
So what's the company going to do? What's the company going to do?
I know that you want me to say prices will increase. I say that doesn't happen because demand remains stable when these.
I'm just talking about. Wait. Just answer. I'm just asking you to answer my question. If I have $200 and I can pay off the company with $200, the company's going to go, hey, what if I hike it up to $250? The government will still have to pay off $250.
Thank you, senators. Question time has now elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech in affirmation, I now call for my final speech in negation. Speakers, please raise a hand or placard. That goes to Senator Sun on recency.
Thank you. Senator Sun, SUN, second time today, this time on the negation. Once again, that's SUN on the negation. If anyone's not ready, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll give it a few seconds and I'll begin. All right. I think we're all good. PO, sorry. Let me just PO pin. Okay, cool. I hate to be the person who says it, but the affirmative's passion in today's debate with the intent of their advocacy is entirely misplaced. For a side that really wants to help the educational outcomes of low-income students, this bill does near nothing to solve that problem. Besides not providing equipment, the legislation also opts for a tax credit instead of the monthly discounts that are far superior. If this Congress actually had values in comprehensive reform, we'd pass more progressive legislation, not baby steps forward like this bill intends to take. I want to argue that affirmative impacts are far too enthusiastic with what they can actually achieve given the legislation. With the impacts of education from Senator Lynn, undocumented immigrants from Senator Brissett, and infrastructure from both senators on the affirmation. First, the CRS explains in March that only 50 to 75% of undocumented immigrants pay taxes, meaning 1 out of 4 to 1/2 of the undocumented immigrants Senator Brissett cares so much about are unable to access a single benefit under this bill because they can't get a tax credit if they're not paying taxes. Second, I would argue that status quo reforms terminally resolve every single impact that the affirmative is trying to link to with today's legislation. The Hill explains in February that the FCC's new broadband program offers low-income families a $50 monthly credit toward their internet bills, as well as a discount on tablets and laptops, both of which today's legislation fails to do. Politico furthers in March that Biden is even proposing $100 billion in terms of stimulus to bring down overpriced monthly bills. But the affirmation is probably asking me at this point, what's the harm of today's legislation? Let's take them at their highest ground and assume there are a lot of low-income families taking tax credits upon passage. The issue with a tax credit is that it requires you to have money in the first place because you can only claim the tax deduction when you file taxes at the end of each year. This is a direct incentive for families to take out loans because the mechanism of a loan, like a payday loan, is that you get money and then you pay it back just in time for that tax deduction to take place. As finances tighten, there's going to be more and more incentive for families to take these loans. Here's why this is a huge problem. The Center for Responsible Learning explains in 2018 that in Michigan, for instance, payday lenders disproportionately target rural, low-income neighborhoods intentionally with the goal of deceiving them into thinking that they can get a loan and pay it back with their next payday. Here's the problem with these loans. CNBC explains in February 2019 that nearly 1 in 4 loanees for payday loans are repeat prey. They have to reborrow 9 times to pay off an average $520 in addition to the principal that they originally paid for. But because of the fine print of payday lender contracts, many of these people are uninformed when it comes to taking loans in the first place. 2 impacts. First, the more ground that the affirmative wants to claim with regards to the amounts of people affected by this bill is the higher risk that all of the simultaneous negative impacts come to fruition. Second, these payday lenders specifically target minority communities, with the LA Times explaining 10 days ago, while African Americans make up 12% of Texas's population, they make up 35% of payday lender website photos, particularly because these modern day loan sharks want to cast their nets in that way. This entire round is about the courage to tear down an abusive system instead of empowering it. The only question left is, how will you be accountable?
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We are now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please raise a hand or placard. First, Senator Lynn.
Hi, so you're telling us that for people who don't have an income, they wouldn't be able to receive these benefits and then they would take out loans instead, right?
Yeah, because you need the upfront cash. You need to pay for it with your own money. That's the way tax credits work.
If payday loans also require you to initially have income, how does that work?
Payday loans have less requirements than other lenders for the express purpose of luring people into debt traps.
But you still have to have an income before you get a payday loan.
And these people, and if you're right about a tax credit, then these people will have some income, making it more likely they're going to take that payday loan.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Brissett.
Okay, so let's talk about those $50 discounts through the FCC's existing program. What are some of the eligibility requirements in order to receive that $50 discount?
So the eligibility requirements are not more restrictive than the eligibility requirements under this bill when you consider that a tax credit renders the mechanism of this legislation inaccessible to the majority of people that this bill actually wants to impact.
Okay, but I'm talking about undocumented immigrants again. So does the FCC's tax
As Senator
credit
Yoon
require-
pointed out, there's nothing preventing us from direct discounts toward undocumented immigrants. I'm not opting for
Thank
a
you,
tax.
senators. Question time has now elapsed, and so has my time as your presiding officer. I want to thank you all again for a great final round. This was my first time at the Tournament of Champions, and it was a genuine pleasure. Good luck to the debaters and to the next presiding officer, Senator Tong. I'll hand it off to him now.
Thank you, Senator Cow, for the virtual gavel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Senator William Tong, that's spelled T-O-N-G, and I am profoundly honored to serve as your finals round presiding officer here from rainy Illinois. First, I'd like to congratulate everyone for making it to TOC finals and congressional debate. This is a huge achievement. And because everyone has put in so much hard work, I'm going to endeavor, like my colleagues before me, to offer the best experience possible in this round. So for timing, my time signals are mostly like Senator Cow's. The major difference is that at halfway into your speech, so that's 2 minutes, I'll give you this black 2 minutes card. Then for everything else, pretty standard. At 3 minutes having elapsed, green, yellow for 3:30, and then red for 3:55. At 4 minutes, I will put up both of my hands and then count you down to 4:10. Because it is a 4-minute speech, I'm going to cut you off immediately once you reach that at the end of that grace period. So make sure you don't abuse it. Regarding personal timers, I'm completely fine if you use your own phone or watch the time as long as it's okay with the parliamentarian and the judges, right? Just remember that my time signals do take precedence. Remember that for questioning, we'll be using 30-second blocks, 4 for each sponsor first negation speech, except I won't be presiding over any of those. So all of the rest of our speeches have 2 questioning blocks each. I'll just wait until you get to 25 seconds, and then I'll count you down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cut you off. I'm going to call on speakers and questioners separately, first with precedence and recency, and I'll also endeavor to put the questioners in the chat. So try to raise your placard as early as possible and pay attention to the chat because I will probably be announcing the next questioner there. I also, like my colleagues before me, have a presiding officer sheet. It is tinyurl.com/TOCPO. I'm also sending it in the chat. And I just like to say that just as much as this is a competitive round, it's also an educational round. I was personally someone who learned a lot of what I know about Congress today by watching the live stream of this very round last year. So in addition to sending my link in the chat, I'm also going to let the audience know, if there's anyone watching right now, you can go to tinyurl.com/TOCPO as well and use this PO sheet to follow along with this round, learn how to PO. And if you're new, you can actually, you can feel free to make a copy of this sheet and use it to the best of your abilities. If you would like to speak, question, make motions, or vote, just raise your placard as we've been doing. Can everyone just raise their placards to the camera right now so I have it positioned correctly? I want to be as efficient as possible. All right, thank you. And of course, tournament rules do require that I run a closed chamber. So just drop a point of personal privilege to exit or enter in the chat, and then I will respond promptly. I'm going to ask that no more than 2 senators are gone at a time so as to respect our fellow competitors, and that you only leave in between speeches and questioning. Lastly, if you freeze, lag, or are rendered otherwise inaudible for 7 or more consecutive seconds during your speech, I will stop my timer, tell you first in the chat that you have frozen, then verbally. We're going to wait for you to get back on, and then I'm going to consult with the parliamentarian and judges as to at what point in your speech you would start up again. We do have 10 minutes of tech time still, so no worries. And of course, because equity is the goal in this tournament, if we need more time, I will be sure to ask the parliamentarian. Are there any questions? I know that was a lot. Senator Martinez.
I have more of a personal question. It's like pouring down here. So if I speak and you can't hear me, can you let me know beforehand, or should I just go on with my speech? How is my sound right now, actually?
Right now, it's fine. If you need, I can have everyone turn off their camera during your speech, if that would help with the connection issues.
No, it's just that the rain is really loud. So.
Oh, you're completely fine right now. I think Zoom gets rid of the background noise, so you're good. Any other questions? If not, we will continue. Let me just check the judges really quickly. Great. We'll continue. The last speech was on the negation of this legislation regarding broadband access. So I'm going to call for a speech in affirmation. Speakers, please raise your placards. All right. That falls to Senator Martinez.
I thank the chair. Hello, that's Senator Martinez speaking on the affirmation of this piece of legislation. Again, I know I have a lot of judges, so if anyone's not ready, let me know. But for my parley and presiding officer, I am always ready for the second and final time. Thank you. 2010's film and television documented the meteoric rise of the internet's prevalence in our daily lives. From dramatic biopics like The Social Network to poorly conceived horror films like Unfriended, it's safe to say the internet was something of its own genre. But one of my favorite intriguing, albeit exaggerated series was Catfish, premised on exposing people who fabricate online identities for attention and money. Yet in this new decade, the prevalence of internet imposters are not the people behind the screen, but the ones connecting us. The reason you pass today's legislation is to end predatory business practices. Now, the negation has already argued that when you fail today's legislation, you're actually advocating for families who have fallen for predatory business practices. And that's championed by Senator Morotra, who says that today's legislation enables monopolies. But two responses to that. Number one, today's legislation already addresses that. And number two, even if it doesn't, they both exist in either world. But the greatest change you're making with today's legislation is finally addressing it. Unfortunately, broadband access status as a necessity is being exploited by companies. And that's explained by an analysis by the Partnership for LA Schools, published on April 22nd of 2020, that found that internet companies were making conditional offers to low-income families by advertising free trials and reduced rates after commitment. But when families inquired, they were either denied offers or contractual terms were changed. Worst of all, when low-income customers sign up for these services, they're subject to data caps. Jacob Passy for MarketWatch tells us on January 28th of 2021 that companies like Comcast, AT&T, and Mediacom have announced new data caps in response to internet demands, charging up to $10 for an additional 50 gigabytes. This is especially dangerous when more Americans than ever are working from home and using data-intensive services. Let's take Zoom, for example. This current Zoom call takes about 2.4 gigabytes per hour in usage of a group meeting. When students are spending up to 7 and 8 hours in school, they can very easily reach data caps. Just being able to access this program through which we communicate is a privilege that thousands are not afforded and companies are willing to exploit. But we readily implement standards that prevent this. Section 2A defines this broadband as high-speed internet access that is always on. Thus, if parents cannot pay for upgrades, by law, companies are mandated to continue service. But even if that's not enough, tax credits consider how much is needed for each bill, meaning we'll never have to worry about not having enough money. But second, let's move on to negation to advocacy and understand why for the rest of the round, the affirmation will win. If we really want to get into the legality of this legislation, let's address the contention over parental access to dependents, championed by Senator Morotra. Look to publication 503 of the Internal Revenue Service. That care for one or more qualifying persons is identified on Form 2441. That can be filed by people who are both in joint custody and people who file their taxes separate, either separated parents or married couples. The only things that disqualify you are if you exceed the monetary limit of dependent care benefits, resolving your concerns about higher income Americans taking money, and if a parent does not exercise due diligence or an effort to file one's taxes and receive the credit. If anything, it shuts down the limits of the nuclear family by preventing absent parents from benefiting from hardworking parents. But then we move on to Senator Sun. With better fiscal resources, loans are no longer an issue for underserved companies. But even if we don't see that happen, let's address that argument. Because in order to get a loan, you need good credit. How can low-income Americans build credit for loans if they can't even invest in assets in the first place? But then you advocate for vouchers. However, those are even more exclusive, and you did not even answer Senator Brissett when he told you what qualifies one for those discounts. The FCC Lifeline discount program says you have to make less than 135% of the federal poverty guideline or have a family member in some public assistance program. That reaches thousands of Americans, yet still so many are discounted. Under today's legislation, you open it up universally, and universal broadband access deserves to be a human right. For true accountability, for true access and opportunity, you pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. I will go first to Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. So do you need a device to access the internet?
Yes.
Okay, and do low-income families have access to devices like computers and phones typically?
Yes, as Senator Lynn told you in her sponsorship speech, the problem is that a lot of low-income families have computers, tablets, and phones. They just don't
Wouldn't
have
you
consistent
say?
internet
Wouldn't
access.
you
That's why
say?
they're going to public places.
Wouldn't you say that high-income families typically use that technology more and are more likely to benefit by this legislation?
No, just because you're low income doesn't disqualify you from using an electronic device. It just your
Thank you, Senator Reeser.
You talked about how broadband providers have data caps where connections get shut off. Do broadband providers also have data caps where internet speeds get significantly slowed?
Yeah, I'd assume that ISPs do that. But the thing is,
Right.
today's legislation establishes a standard for the quality of internet. It's better and
Right.
faster than traditional dial-up.
But my point is, if companies can slow down, if ISPs can slow down connections to the point where a Zoom call that's taking up 2.4 gigabytes per hour isn't even feasible, then what's the point of having that rule in place?
Right, but it's always on, and it mentions the standard.
Thank you, Senators. Time has elapsed. Thank you. Speakers on the negation, please raise your placards. All right. That follows the speaking order. So Senator Reeser, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. That's Senator Reeser, R-E-A-S-E-R, giving my second and final speech of this wonderful final session. I'll give the judges another 10 seconds. All right. Are there any judges not ready? Excellent. March 20th, 2020. That was the last day I saw my friends and teachers at school. Dare I say, the last day of pre-pandemic normalcy. But I am fortunate. All of us are. As we sit here today, each of us have the privilege of doing an activity we hold near and dear to our hearts, even if it may be virtual. But I speak today not on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the thousands, if not millions, of children across the country who are being left behind by the cold hearts of monopolized broadband providers. And with them in mind, I urge you to fail this bill because using tax credits only makes the problem worse, and because the affirmation misrepresents the extent to which broadband infrastructure expands. First and foremost, you fail this bill because it uses uncapped tax credits as its method of solvency. So let's frame the problem with tax credits through the eyes of three groups: the lower working class, the upper class, and everyone else. First, the poorest Americans, who make up a substantial portion of the target population. And for them, the problem comes in the basic nature of tax credits. You have to file taxes in the first place. The Tax Policy Center on May 2020 explains that because many low-income households make less than the standard deduction, they simply don't spend the time to file federal income taxes. That's also why, for instance, the Urban Institute on July 2020 explains that the IRS struggled to get CARES Act stimulus funds to the poorest Americans, despite the fact that poorest Americans were actually prioritized. Second, the upper class, probably the simplest problem. We take tax money and give it to people who, by definition, don't need it. Third, and most hurt by this legislation, is everyone who doesn't fit into the previous two categories. To understand the problem, let's look back to the legislation. It tells us we get a tax credit for broadband for the previous years of broadband expenditures. And here's the issue. Americans under this legislation have to foot the upfront cost. Now, Senator Sun already told you that, but there's a far more sinister consequences for this group because of this legislation. Senator Mehrotra got to the right impact of increased costs, but as the negation pointed out, she used the wrong formula. So let me show you the right one and why costs increase, because there's no limit on the tax credit we give out. What that means is that broadband companies can marginally increase their prices as they see fit, knowing that a substantial number of consumers can still afford the upfront cost with the tax credit, and that will more than make up for the tiny loss of the poorest consumers who cannot make up that new upfront cost that's increased because of the marginal increase. Except, of course, that's not good because now there's even more people who don't have access to broadband because you've increased the upfront cost. And then you get this death spiral where they can continue to increase marginal costs up and up and up until the point where it becomes economically unfeasible. But at that point, you've already disadvantaged so many people who can no longer get broadband because the upfront cost has increased by so much. All in all, you failed this legislation because a tax credit rewards people who can afford broadband in the first place and allows providers to marginally increase prices in perpetuity. But second, you fail this bill because this bill simply won't bring broadband to new areas and groups of people, at least to a significant extent that's been represented by the affirmation. So Senator Lynn tells you that this will bring internet to students in rural areas, and Senator Brissett tells you that broadband providers will bring their infrastructures to more areas. But the important thing to note here is that the tax credit goes to the consumer, not the broadband company. And as 538 on July 27, 2017 explains, the county with the least number of adults with broadband is a rural county in Colorado. The reason is because the county is 3 times the size of Rhode Island with a very small population. And if we use data for the US Census Bureau, it becomes clear ISPs are not going to invest in a county with 7,000 residents when capturing 1% of the population of Rhode Island, all densely populated, makes them more money. It simply won't happen because it doesn't matter how many of those residents of those rural counties actually spend. It will never compete with densely populated areas. Senators, even tax credits come at a cost. The cost of this one is too high.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. That goes first to Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator. So if you're a ISP and you raise your prices to such a level, if another company enters the market and has lower prices, don't you lose your market share?
That's true to an extent, except for the fact that ISPs are widely monopolized across the country. So that doesn't happen.
I've heard this excuse so many times, but don't we literally have the power to combat monopolies?
I mean, if we can do that, that's non-unique. We can do that now. We can do that when we pass this legislation.
So why don't we combat that without failing?
That's not what this legislation is doing, though.
But we have the power.
Senator, the fact of the matter is we have over 7,000 ISPs in our country. If one suddenly decides to hike the rates, why can't the other undercut them?
Well, first off, because others are also incentivized to raise their rates. Maybe not.
Wait, why? You can get way more customers by like permanently driving your opponent out of the market.
Yes, but they only need to underbid a company that raises their prices by a very, very marginal amount.
Right,
so
and then the other will behind. This is like the process of arbitrage, right? Companies will continue to drive down the cost.
If I raise my rate from $40 to $50, then companies behind me are just incentivized to just raise it to $49.
Yeah, so they'll continue to decrease it until.
Thank you. Speakers on the affirmation, please raise your placards. All right, that falls to speaking order. Senator Wu.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Senator Wu, second time today, still spelled W, 2 letters. I'm on the affirmative. Any indication when you're ready, I'm happy to begin. If you need anything else from me, let me know. Good. Okay. Awesome. Oh, shoot, I got to pin my PO. All right. 50 years ago, in response to numerous disturbing pollution events like the Cuyahoga River fires, this very Congress passed a law known as the Clean Water Act, declaring a simple objective: to make waters fishable and swimmable. To get there, the act put into play a suite of programs to limit pollution, force cleanup, and improve biological integrity. 50 years ago, we affirmed that every American should have access to clean drinking water. Internet access in 2021 has become identical to clean water access 50 years prior. When are we going to recognize that the internet isn't just some privilege, it's a necessity for all? The internet has carried us into the information age, guns blazing. Our reliance on the net and its array of services has become sine qua non. Just like clean water, it's time to let everyone drink up. First, passed to create the ripples in the eventual ocean of universal internet access. Right now, the lack of broadband access is drowning our future business and economy in a sea of dirty water. Tom Wheeler of Brookings contextualizes this problem in May of 2020 when he tells us that Americans in urban areas tend to have internet access outside their door, but cannot afford its monthly fee. Americans with rural ones don't have the infrastructure available to facilitate ubiquitous broadband. But what does that mean? Either demographic you look towards, this very piece of legislation you have before you changes the dynamic. As a result of direct, escalatory, and inaccessible pricing to the internet itself, American families in cities cannot afford to pay for installation that gives them access to broadband. But this legislation guarantees that we are subsidizing the bill, closing the affordability gap permanently. This layer of warranting is at best tenuously contested by Senator Sun in his speech when he tells us that we don't subsidize equipment. But at the point where millions of Americans in cities, the thing that precludes them from access isn't equipment, it's the monthly fee, this bill does change. Every single one of my colleagues on the affirmative has already shown you what happens when students get access to high-speed internet. But keep in mind, every member of a household now gets their internet installation costs subsidized, not just the kid. Senator Lynn tells you in the sponsorship speech that providers have currently no incentive to provide access to rural areas. But her bill also provides similar incentives for the entire private sector to create new jobs in those areas. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce explains in January of 2021 that in certain states where high-speed internet, particularly in the South, isn't ubiquitous, so when all of those people were forced to work from home remotely in 2020, they didn't have proper internet capabilities, which means that those companies shifted production and shifted employment out of those states because those states are not conducive to industry. When you pass this bill and give tax credits to millions of eligible American families, it's not just educational opportunity you expand, it's vocational too. Specifically, Senator Marocha, if people in a state have access to broadband because of tax credits and that levels out inequalities, you create economic and infrastructural reasons for companies to expand into those states. In the next 20 years, things like e-commerce are going to dominate the marketplace to the point where Americans are denied employment because of those inequities. If you do not pass this bill, you are leaving the business of tomorrow submerged. If that's not enough, let's deal with the residual harms, the price hikes that Senator Reeser just told you about from ISPs. Senator Marocha already made the concession in cross-examination that as long as I sufficiently prove that smaller ISPs can compete against AT&T and Comcast, we have a reason to believe that low prices empower them. Bill Snyder of the Consumer Tech Radar explains in May of 2017 that in California, while giant providers like Verizon and Google struggled to roll out ultra-fast broadband, small regional ISPs brought affordable fiber service to thousands of homes and small businesses in the Bay. Senator Reeser, at the point where small providers can always undercut big ones and provide good rates to people that can't afford them, you have a reason to send more people their way. Welcome to the US Senate. Every single day we're in session, we sit here behind our laptops and we talk about our people like they're just numbers on a report. But realize, the American children that this piece of legislation deals with don't have the privilege of attending the Tournament of Champions because they don't have a laptop. Please affirm and connect them.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Senator Sun.
Why a tax credit?
Because it helps low-income and middle-income earners
Why not a
afford
monthly
the broadband
discount?
rates.
Why not a
Sorry.
monthly discount?
Because the
Internet
tax
bills are
credit-
not yearly, they're monthly, right?
Sure.
So why are we forcing people to pay for it up front and then being reimbursed later? Why is that preferable?
Because the current barrier to accessibility is that first initial fee. They can't afford the installation
Yeah,
cost.
I'm telling you, we can pay for that initial fee. Why is a yearly tax credit better than a monthly discount?
Because you just told me that a
Thank you,
monthly
Senator Hume.
All right, senators. So you talk about basic necessities. If millions of Americans right now don't have access to food, shelter, and medicine, why should we continue to give everyone the internet first before guaranteeing those three?
I'm not sure why those things are exclusive. Why can't we
They're
guarantee
exclusive
both?
because our welfare budgets are entirely tied up right now, right?
Great. So I'm telling
But
you that in
even
states,
if they're not, right? Shouldn't we
hold
guarantee?
on, let me finish my answer because I think this is really important for millions of Americans. In the American South, there are states with unequal access to internet, which precludes employment. They
Thank
don't
you,
have jobs
Senators.
because
Time has
industries are
elapsed.
shifting out.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you.
Speakers on the negation, please raise your placards. Senator Yoon, unopposed.
I thank the chair. This is Senator Yoon speaking for what seems to be the last time in today's session. That hasn't changed. Is anybody not ready? I'll just get right into it. Sounds great. I will begin. My time. Shoot a timer. Begin. As probably one of the only low-income senators in this chamber, I feel there's one question in this debate that the affirmation should answer, must answer, but hasn't answered and won't be able to answer. If you only take away one thing from my speech, let it be this one question. Who knows more about what my low-income family needs? My family, who calculates our tight budget every day, or the United States Congress 5,000 miles away? I stress this. Who knows more about what my family needs? My family or Congress? Because as soon as the sponsor, Senator Lynn, didn't address this in their speech, it sinks their entire side into a double bind they can't recover. I'll turn this debate 180 degrees around, distance myself from everyone else, and negate. The framework we're operating under is one of helping those most vulnerable, like Senator Lynn outlines. I agree. But what the affirmation tells us is that we should give these people Wi-Fi credits. I disagree. As the Wall Street Journal explains in March 2020, because of the pandemic, tax revenue is at a historic low and all social safety programs are going to see fund reductions over the next half decade. This means two things.
First, we have negative social program funding. And second, if we have two options for welfare, we need to invest in the one that maximizes value. Now, this bill says the US government will pay for the Wi-Fi of every household in the United States with children, trying to make sure low-income families who can't afford it get access. And as per Statista, in October 2019, for 16.2 million of these households, it would cost about $12 billion. I say all this to bring us to the paramount reason you negate. Prefer spending this $12 billion on direct cash aid to low-income households and not Wi-Fi credits for every household. Both Senators Sun and Mehrotra tell us tax credits are ineffective. Let me show you the alternative. There's one key reason to prefer cash aid over Wi-Fi credits: economic elasticity. What does this mean? As Dr. Jesse Kuna of Texas A&M explains in September 2015, cash aid is flexible while specific credits aren't. As an example, say your car breaks down or you need medicine and you need $400 to fix it. Senator Lynn, cash aid allows you to fix your car or buy that medicine. Wi-Fi credits don't. But in capitalism, mistakes compound. If your car breaks down and you can't fix it, you can't get to work, which costs you in the long run. If you need medicine, but you don't have the cash to pay and you take out a loan, that debt grows. If you don't settle a financial problem immediately, that mistake gets bigger. That's why Kuna tells us that cash aid is 20% more effective than specialized grants in making people's lives better by giving them the flexible capital to deal with problems immediately. The impact is what The Atlantic explains in their September 2015 article titled, quote, "The best welfare reform, give poor people cash." Because of increased elasticity, cash aid of just 10% of poverty-stricken Americans' income would increase their economic power by some 26%. Conveniently, that's almost exactly the same price of the Wi-Fi credits this bill is trying to give to everyone. The biggest impact this round, Senator Brissett, is that 16 million people now have access to 26% more purchasing power with cash aid because it's elastic if you fail this legislation in place for cash aid. Instead of giving everyone broadband, let people pick what they need through cash aid. From this point, if what these families need the most is internet, they'll buy internet. If these families need transportation, they'll buy that. Senator Martinez, data plans are less important than letting families pick to spend aid on their most important self-determined needs. At the end of the day, I implore each and every one of you to come to my low-income neighborhood. I know people personally splitting insulin 4 ways in my city while others go hungry. For them, their main concern is medicine and food, and it is liberal arrogance to pretend we know what each family out of these 16 million actually needs. Everyone, affirmative and negation, let people pick for themselves and give them cash aid instead.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 59 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Senator Martinez.
All right, I want to talk about economic opportunity. So broadband doesn't just mean we're connecting schools to students, we're also connecting entire families to economic opportunity.
And job opportunities, right?
Job offers, exactly.
If people determine that they need internet the most, that's what they'll buy. But if people are starving, that's like
I
a
understand,
prerequisite,
but
right?
don't you think it's a lot more stable to allow people to build their income through these job
No, I would
offers?
say it's a lot more stable to let people determine for themselves what they need. Our Congress can't say 16 million families
to have
need the
enough
same
cash
thing.
aid. We're running out of cash
Thank
aid,
you,
so
Senator
your
Wu.
demand falls.
Thank you. So can you explain to me why we debate any policy at all that presumes that our constituents need X thing or Y thing?
I mean, all I'm saying is if you have elastic cash, your purchasing power increases by 26%. If you have like specific aid, your purchasing power is flat,
So
right?
if we operate under this framework that we should always give them the choice, why do we presume that they have any necessities at all? Because then, we're just making an assumption, right?
Clear necessities in the status quo, right? Like people are starving. I mean, that's—
Thank you, Senators. Time has elapsed. And I will remind the chamber, just like Senator Cow told us, you can't hear anyone if both people are talking at the same time. With that, all affirmative speakers, please raise your placards. All right. It falls to Senator Challuri.
Thank you. That's Senator Challuri, Chelluri, the second and sadly final time for this tournament. Just like last time, if any of my judges aren't ready, let me know. Otherwise, I'll get started as soon as I pull up the time. Great, everyone looks good. As members of Congress, our education brought us to where we are right now. Sitting on a computer and debating pieces of legislation that affect millions seems like an easy task for us. But when millions of my low-income constituents suffered to get an education at every stage, at every single day, this piece of legislation finally gives them a light at the end of the tunnel. As one of the final speakers, let's understand the pitfalls of the affirmation in today's debate, of the negation in today's debate, to see exactly where the affirmation wins. First, let's understand exactly why in today's debate, when you affirm, you increase the access to low-income broadband infrastructure in low-income regions across the United States. Senator Malhotra is the main champion of this argument. She tells you that when you pass today's piece of legislation, the demand for broadband in high-income regions increases drastically. By her same logic, if a small percent of high-income Americans who don't have access to broadband right now can suddenly get it and demand increases to that large of an extent, low-income people at a larger percentage finally having the opportunity to pay for internet increases demand by an even much larger extent than she actually tells you. But why does that matter in the context of this round? The Harvard Business Review in 2019 quantifies that when companies usually access an entire new wing or entire new group of customers, such as broadband companies having access to low-income Americans, those companies flock towards new consumer groups because it's an opportunity for economic profit. What does that tell you in today's round? When you finally give low-income people the access to pay for broadband internet, you enable and incentivize broadband companies to start developing infrastructure and actually giving low-income people access to that internet in the first place. At that point, the affirmation has lost all warranting on this singular argument. But take them at their highest ground. Say that warranting still stands. Why even then does the affirmation still outweigh the negation? Senators Reeser and Malhotra both tell you about large companies monopolizing costs and the high-income people paying higher prices. Let me explain to you a simple principle of competition. That same Harvard Business Review article I cited earlier goes on to explain how competition affects prices. Essentially, if company A charges a good at $10 and company B charges a good at $9, under today's legislation, everybody flocks towards company B, forcing company A to reduce their prices. Ultimately, natural competition keeps those prices low, removing any impact the negation gives you in today's round. But second, let's understand, are tax credits actually the best option under this piece of legislation? Senator Sun tells you in this debate that when you pass today's piece of legislation, people without an income are incentivized to go to loans. Look towards the Economic Policy Institute in 2019, when they explain that to get a loan, you have to have a good amount of credit. Essentially, a bank has to believe that you can actually pay off that loan. Your argument is entirely non-unique, because if someone without an income can't pay off a loan, a bank isn't going to give them a loan in the first place. But why does that actually matter? Because when Senator Lynn asked you about that in questioning, you respond by saying that even if someone has a small income, they're still going to prep loans. Why is that not the case? You yourself in your own speech explain the lucrative structure behind loans. Low-income Americans, knowing that, would much rather prep a tax credit over a lucrative system of loans that puts them into a cycle of debt. Ultimately, the affirmation outweighs on that singular impact. That means the only impacts left in this round come from Senator Sun and Yoon. Both of them explain that there's better alternatives to today's legislation than a tax credit. Here's the problem. Neither of them acknowledge that a tax credit is completely better than what people are receiving in the status quo. At the point at which the only other impact the negation gives in this round is that today's legislation isn't good enough, the affirmation is already far ahead when it comes to where your vote goes. Fundamentally, you pass today's piece of legislation for those same low-income Americans that both sides advocate for in today's round. When you affirm, you finally put a light at the end of a dark, dark tunnel for millions of my low-income constituents that need an education on a day-to-day basis. Stand on the right side of history. Stand with your constituents. Stand in the affirmation.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 53 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. It goes first to Senator Mazumdar.
Thank you. Are AT&T and Comcast the largest ISP providers?
Okay, AT&T and Comcast are the largest ones, but there's still like multiple other ISPs that still provide internet, especially small.
So what in this legislation suddenly diversifies the field and reduces their monopoly?
All right, like Senator Boo told you in an earlier questioning period, it's those smaller ISPs that generally provide to low-income Americans, right? You increase the demand to them and then help those companies.
How is that true when the smaller ISPs charge the most because they don't have as many resources as Comcast and AT&T?
Okay, but the problem with that is that if the government Americans can afford it, that demand still.
Thank you, Senator Reeser.
If company A doubles their prices and demand shrinks by just like 1%, since most but not all Americans can continue to handle that upfront cost, what will company B do?
Okay, so that's what I'm telling you, right? Even if a company raises their prices, another company drops it, and then the federal government starts commissioning that company to build infrastructure because it's cheaper.
That principle is based off the idea that you have a linear relationship between demand and price, but that isn't true under this tax credit because people can continue to demand stuff at higher prices.
Right, the federal government can choose who they want to commission.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
I thank the chair.
Speakers on the negation, please raise your placards. Any and all negation speakers. Seeing none, the chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate, but we must move on. So all speakers on the affirmation, please raise your placards. Senator Juneja, unopposed.
I thank the chair. For everyone's reference, I'm Senator Juneja. I spoke roughly in the middle of the round last time, and I'm speaking right at the end this time. With that being said, can I get any signal from my judges when they're all ready? All right, it looks like we're good. And PO, great. This Congress often talks about helping Americans pursue the American dream. What we don't recognize is that for many, institutional inequality makes the American dream nothing but a dream. Today, I'm passing because we finally make that dream that founded this country attainable. That's why we pass. This entire discussion has centered around one question. Does this legislation actually help low-income Americans? As one of the last affirmative speakers in this debate, let's work through this entire discussion and see why the answer is categorically yes. First, Senator Malhotra and Son, you say that not every low-income Americans will benefit from today's legislation, but I'd argue that even if some low-income Americans benefit, that is still a step in the right direction. Senator Malhotra and Reeser, if you're so worried about companies monopolizing when we pass, under Sherman antitrust laws, if you view those monopolies as predatory, we literally have the power to combat that. When we stop dwelling on the disadvantages and instead look for solutions, it's our constituents who benefit. Now, Senator Lynn started this debate touching on educational inequity in COVID-19, but let's zoom out and talk about why people lack broadband in the first place. Monica Anderson found for the Pew Research Center in 2016 that 50% of people without broadband access say they don't have it because it's far too expensive, even if they're employed. So Senator Malhotra and Reeser, an income tax credit directly helps all of those Americans and is easier to file for than getting a monthly discount. Senator Son and Yoon, that's why we use an income tax. Today's legislation helps families who can't afford the internet by funneling the cost of it back to them in the form of an income tax credit. Now, Senator Brissett talked about undocumented immigrants, Senator Lynn talked about increased rural investments, and Senator Martinez talked about data caps. I want to be the first to actually talk about the single largest impact in today's debate that has gone entirely neglected, and the direct impact is decreasing poverty. A December 2020 report by Gennaro Cruz of the World Bank Organization finds that with access to broadband, extreme poverty declined by about 4 percentage points after 1 year of gaining mobile broadband coverage, and about 7 percentage points after 2 or more years of coverage. That's because in our increasingly virtual world, those who do not have access to internet do not have access to their full opportunities. But when you increase broadband access, you increase employment by increasing job opportunities. Senator Yoon, that's why internet access is uniquely good. When we pass, we not only help the children trying to attend school, but also the parents trying to find better jobs. And we directly combat poverty by 7%. Senator Son, this legislation can help 2.2 million Americans, with 1.1 million of them being children, escape poverty. And no negation impact even compares to that. We don't have to worry about loans not being paid off, Senator Son, when we help Americans get better, higher paying jobs. And Senator Yoon, cash aid is not mutually exclusive with this legislation. We have the power of the purse. If we want to back both cash aid and internet welfare, we can do that. But finally, why is decreasing poverty so important? An August 2013 report by Megan Kelly from Princeton University finds that poverty decreases brain power by the equivalent of 13 IQ points, the same amount as losing a full night of sleep for children. That's because for a child, dealing with the stressors of poverty and not having proper nutrition leads to increases in anxiety and way worse school performance, ultimately culminating in much higher dropout rates. That's why the Pew Research Center found in 2013 that only 3 out of every 10 Americans ever make it out of poverty. We exponentially raise that number when we pass. Senator Son, that's the biggest impact in today's debate because it doesn't just affect the Americans in the present, but millions in the future. That's what we prioritize. No negation impact even comes close to comparing with that. The Declaration of Independence always talks about the pursuit of happiness, but I'm tired of forcing Americans to pursue it. Let's guarantee it. Pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. Any and all. First to Senator Son.
What's the difference between a loan and a payday loan?
If it's a pay, like regardless, it doesn't matter.
It's not regardless. What's the difference between the two?
Well, honestly, I don't know. You can explain it to me.
The difference is in a payday loan, you don't have a credit check. You don't need to show them any credit. You don't need to show them income.
Regardless, like, let me answer, because it doesn't matter if you're increasing the higher paying jobs.
Can
Like,
you
that's
explain the average demographic that is going to be benefited from a tax credit per year versus a
7%
monthly
of
discount?
low-income Americans will be lifted out of poverty in less than 2 years. That's the research I read.
Thank you, Senator Yoon.
Senator, the reason why we don't do both cash aid and internet credits is because cash aid is 26% more effective. So every dollar we have should go into cash aid. Why should we split our limited funds between one efficient program and one inefficient program when we could put all our money into the efficient program?
I want to make sure that our low-income constituents have access to internet.
Right, and you don't know if that's their most pressing need. Why wouldn't we let them decide? We lose $2.6 billion for every $10 billion we give out.
It can be a win-win situation. We can get Americans out of poverty through the internet while
Thank
also
you, Senators. Time has elapsed. We do need to have a negation speech, so all negative speakers, please raise your placards. The chair would entertain a recess. Senator Reeser.
I move for a 1.5 minute in-house recess.
Seconds.
Second.
Any objections? 1.5 minutes.
All right, so what's going on then? Do we want to move on to a third bill, or are we just
I
in
think,
a pickle?
I believe me and Senator Gu need to give a second speech. If it's okay with Mr. Gu, I would propose to move to question and have like a quick cycle on NIMBY, just so we can have more debate and cover a different topic. But
yeah, I'm a fan of that as well.
And are you both on the F or both on the nay, or are we split evenly?
I'm on the
I have an
affirmation. Okay, so we're both on that.
Okay. And I just want to check really quickly with the parliamentarian. Are we allowed to do same side speeches on the first cycle?
I will check the procedures. I have the document open right here. Just give me 1 second.
I don't think there was any rule against it necessarily. Obviously, it's frowned upon, but I think that is fine if we do that. In the meantime, after this recess elapses, we'll just move on to the previous question, I think is the best idea. About 30 seconds left.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything that explicitly prohibits it. I mean, I would frown upon it as well. It's fairly unprecedented, especially coming this late in the round, but there's also, I don't think, any explicit rule against it.
All right, thank you. Then if the chamber wishes to do so, we'll proceed. The recess is over. So, Senator Gu.
I move to the previous question.
Seconds. All in favor? Any against? If not, then we'll vote. Then we'll move to voting procedure on this bill regarding broadband access. If you would like to pass today's legislation, you would like to see it sent to the House and the White House, please raise your placards and keep them up. Right. I count Chiluri, Lin, Brissett, Janeja, Gu, Martinez, Wu, Mazumdar. That's 8. And if you would like to defeat today's legislation, please raise your placards. Count Mirothra, Reeser, Sun, and Yoon. Are there any abstentions? There shouldn't be any. Then on a vote of 8-4-0, this legislation does pass. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is NIMBY. That's Finals B. Is there anyone who needs the legislation again, or I don't think anyone's going to need this, but needs me to read the legislation? If not, then we'll proceed right on to the next speech. Is there a sponsor? Senator Gu.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the second time today, that's Senator Gu, spelled G-U. I'm just going to assume my judges are ready unless I'm given an indication otherwise. So if you need a moment or two, just let me know. In the last century, once rural areas have transformed into cityscapes dotted with skyscrapers. We look at American cities as emblems of the American ideal, but we must also acknowledge that urbanization and city building has put us on a collision course with environmental and social effects once thought unimaginable. Today, we can finally reverse course before we do any more damage that cannot be undone. The problem in the status quo is that building height regulations constrain developers. The Brookings Institute on May 5th of 2020 writes that from a cost perspective, it actually costs approximately the same for developers to build a 30-unit building as it does a 100-unit building, because design, regulation, and operation take the lion's share of the funding, not materials. So when developers are able to spread the same cost across more units, not only does the cost per unit go down and the housing crisis is alleviated, but developers also earn more revenue that they can reinvest into building more amenities. But the harms of building height regulations don't stop there. When developers can't build upward, they oftentimes choose to build outward, perpetuating a trend known as urban sprawl. The Journal of Land Use Policy writes in April of 2012 that building height regulations increase the rate of urban sprawl by 12%. These are the exact regulations we remove under Section 1B and Section 1C of my legislation. And to understand why that's so important, we have to understand why urban sprawl is so consequential. The first detrimental consequence is decimating the environment. Karen Cito at the National Academy of Sciences in August of 2017 finds that deforestation due to urban expansion results in 459 megatons of annual CO2 emissions. And the CDC also finds that 75% of emerging infectious diseases are animal-borne, which is why UC Davis points out on April 8th of 2020 that increased human expansion into wildlife territory brings us closer to these animal-borne diseases. Now, I know this sounds comical, but the reality is anything but. The study explains that this spillover of disease from animals to humans puts us at risk of starting another epidemic, if not pandemic. Our never-ending appetite for land, tall buildings, and expansion is starving the earth and poisoning its people. Population growth and the need for more homes is something no one in this chamber will ever be able to control. But our duty as a Congress is to oversee how those homes are built and how the population can grow sustainably. At its core, that is why you affirm. The second major consequence is exacerbating congestion and trapping low-income Americans in literal poverty. South Carolina State University concludes in 2012 that because urban areas are so densely packed, urban sprawl almost always leads to increases in traffic and commuting times. For low-income Americans, this means more than merely being late to work. Ross Shetty at Harvard University in April of 2015 identifies the length of a low-income worker's commute as the single greatest factor in their odds of escaping poverty. When low-income workers are stuck in rush hour traffic for hours each day, they're forced to spend more of their incomes on gasoline, car repairs, or childcare, money they simply do not have. And the more time they spend on the road, the less time they spend with their families and children. The Journal of Child Development finds in December of 2014 that the amount of time a parent spends with her child is directly correlated with that child's future level of success. When being stuck in traffic means that you come home after your child's bedtime, when it means you can't help your child with their homework or even talk about their day, when it means you can't play an active role in your child's life, it's clear vehicle mobility goes hand in hand with social mobility. The burden of the negation is to prove why we shouldn't protect the livelihood of our Earth and our people before it's too late. How much of our planet needs to be eroded, and how many more constituents need to have their humanity erased before we decide that something must change? In my 4 minutes today, I hope I've convinced you not to wait another minute. Affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes exactly. We're now going to have 2 minutes of direct questioning. Questioners, please raise your placards. That goes first to Senator Bristette.
Hi.
So you talk about congestion in your speech. Would you agree that congestion is linked to density?
I would actually argue that the expansion of urban areas and just causing them to proliferate outward is the main cause.
But is it linked to density in any way?
I mean, sure, I guess that could be one of the reasons. But
Right. So if we're passing today's legislation and now we're putting multifamily housing where there's currently single family housing, does that increase or decrease density?
It decreases it because I tell you that
But if
urban
people
sprawl
are living
decreases
there-
by 12%.
No,
Senator,
but
I tell you that urban sprawl decreases by 12%, and that's one of the
Thank
biggest
you, Senator
reasons-
Chiluri.
Hi, so why do most municipalities have regulations on how tall residential buildings can be?
For safety purposes, I assume?
Right, some of it's for safety, but the vast majority of them happen because it costs a lot more money for maintenance and electronics issues when it's a vertically ascending building, right?
Actually,
So
I
that
tell you
happens-
the opposite. I tell you in my speech that developers actually spend the same amount on a 30-unit building as they do on a 100-unit
Right,
building.
that's developers. I'm talking about maintenance issues and
sure.
actual problems, right? So if that happens, don't low-income Americans actually suffer more because they're paying
Wait,
more
they
for those
don't. Their landlords will take care of that.
Thank you, Senator Martinez.
So when compared to single-family residential areas, do people living in apartment buildings have access to green spaces as easily?
Right, I totally feel what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is when developers are earning more revenue and tenants are demanding more of these amenities that you
Right,
talk
but
about,
just
they
a
can
question, as
reinvest into
compared
those.
to the people who have lawns versus nothing, is that really safe for them by putting them on heat islands?
Wait, the fact of the matter is right now they don't get access to those like lawns either,
But in
so I would
single-family
argue that doesn't
homes,
really
at least they
change
have
whether
green
or not.
areas. People are dying from heat stroke because they live in
Thank you,
apartments.
Senator
How do we solve
Marothra.
Hi, where will developers move if we don't build single family homes?
Why don't you tell me?
They'll move to low income areas because it's cheaper to build there. What happens to the people that used to live there?
Actually, like I disagree. I think developers will actually be incentivized to like keep building homes upward, and
Why? Why?
they're not going because
Wait.
I tell you, it costs the same amount to build a
Let's just
vertical high-rise
Oh,
building.
wait, I just want to get back to my questioning. Why wouldn't you want to spend less money on operating and construction costs?
Wait, I mean, developers are going to construct no matter what. We don't
They'll
exacerbate that
construct
by.
it wherever it's cheaper to build so they can sell it off at a
Thank
higher
you,
cost.
senators. Time has elapsed. All right. This is more a process than anything, but are there any negation speakers? Seeing none, the chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate, especially this early on in a new piece of legislation, but are there any affirmative speakers? Senator Mazumdar, you have the floor. And this will be our last speech for today.
First, I just want to say thank you all for letting me speak on this bill. It's pretty close to my heart. I'm happy to be rounding out the session. That's Mazumdar, spelled like how you see my name. At your indication, I'll begin. Great. I'll begin. When my parents immigrated to the United States in the 90s, the rent in my New York neighborhood was $500 a month. Because they moved when prices were affordable, I was raised in one of the greatest cities in the world. I benefited from our public education system, and without it, I wouldn't be here before you. 30 years later, my parents would never have been able to afford renting in New York at this time. As our policy drives up the cost of the American dream, this House is asleep at the wheel. Pass this bill to change that. First, I'd like to talk about renters. Pass this policy because it increases rental housing supply. That's because it employs a new strategy that combines rent control with development grants. Pamela Blumenthal from the Urban Institute explains in August of 2016 that all previous rent control up to that point imposed rent freezes or price ceilings on both old and new properties. But unlike those past efforts, the rent control in Section 3 of this bill is only imposed on new properties. So this rent control doesn't touch the ones that are already built, and it actually makes building new properties even cheaper. Section 4 uniquely complements this by giving out $75 billion in land grants, creating a perfect combination for developers: cheap property with guaranteed customers. This increases the housing supply. Look to Zhaodi Li of the New York University in December of 2019. They explained that every 10% increase in housing supply decreases rent prices by 1%. And that makes a significant difference in our citizens' bank accounts. Look to Bethel Cole Smith of Howard University in January 2020. They say that if it weren't for the 40,000 apartment units that Washington, D.C. has built since 2000, average monthly rent in that city would be $171 higher. And I don't think I need to lecture my fellow Congresspeople about how high DC rent costs already are. If we pass today's legislation, we give millions of more Americans the right to self-determination, to own a home, and to have a community. Housing should not be a rarity, but a common commodity. But it's not just renters. Buyers benefit from this bill as well. Pass this legislation because it increases home ownership. That's because by incentivizing apartment construction, we provide access to cheaper homes. The New York Times reported on March 4th that in my hometown of New York City, the average apartment is 40% smaller than the average size of a townhouse. And that does a lot to decrease the sales price. Look to Business Insider in July of 2019. They report that in the median state, homes sell for $159 per square foot. That means that in the urban areas targeted in this legislation, you can save up to $317,000 by owning an apartment rather than a townhouse. This legislation incentivizes the building of apartments. Senator Gu told you that's more environmentally friendly, but it's also more affordable for our lowest income Americans. So that means that this bill affects more than just renters. And combine that with the fact that new single-family residences in urban areas are banned under Section 1A, this legislation basically shows that new permanent homes are going to be apartments, not townhouses, which means that people in urban areas will be able to buy homes for way cheaper than they are able to in the status quo. Here's why that's so crucial. According to the Federal Reserve Board from 2019, over a 3-year period, housing wealth was the single biggest contributor to the increase in net worth across all income groups. It accounted for 32% of total income increases, and the benefits were most pronounced in low-income households. Under this bill, urban minorities can choose between affordable apartments and rent-controlled properties, putting power back into the hands of the people. As a New Yorker, this issue is too close to my heart to not advocate for it with every ounce of political capital I have left. It's because the first step of turning dreams into realities is to wake up and work that I affirm this legislation. Join me in doing so.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please raise your placards. And even though this is the second speech, it is not a negation, so I'm going to treat it as though it were the second cycle. All right, Senator Lynn.
Hi, so when you ban single residential homes, do you make that more of a rare commodity or a not rare one?
Single-family homes are already so inaccessible to low-income Americans that regardless of that outcome, they will still benefit under passing
The
this bill.
benefits of home ownership. Do most people buy apartments to own?
Yes, apartment ownership is almost as common as single-family rentals. And even if it isn't, that will become more common when you pass this legislation.
It's not, because fundamentally, in order to own the home, you can't be.
Thank you, Senator.
It's owning an apartment.
Thank you. So for single-family residential home ownership, where is that most common? In an urban center or in like a suburb?
Single-family ownership is more common in suburban areas.
Right. So why do we discourage developers from building single-family homes in suburbs and not just like ban them in like big mega cities like New York City?
For a few reasons. First, because of urban sprawl, which Senator Gu just told you. But second, those homes are inaccessible to low-income Americans, and building apartments will conserve more space, be environmentally accessible, and
Thank you, Senators. Time has elapsed. Senator Martinez, for a question or a motion?
No, I was waiting for a question, but I just put it down. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. Right. Seeing as everyone has spoken, Senator Martinez, go ahead.
So barring any other further speakers, I move to the previous question.
Second. All in favor? Any against? If not, then it is time for you to exercise your congressional and civic duty. Everyone who would like to pass today's legislation, please raise your placards and hold them up, keep them up. I will go to, so I'm going to count Senator Lynn, Juneja, Gu, Wu, Chalouri, Mazumdar, Risar, Sun, Brissett, and Marothra. That's 10. And then all who wish to defeat today's legislation, please raise your placards. All right, I count Senator Martinez. Are there any abstentions? Senator Yoon. All right, then on a vote of 10 to 1 to 1, today's legislation does pass. My congratulations to the sponsor. Senator Chalouri.
I move to adjourn.
Seconds? All in favor? Any against? If not, it seems that it's unanimous. We are adjourned at 3:17 Eastern Standard Time. So that's about 43 minutes. Yeah, I did the math correctly. Before we were supposed to end. Congratulations, everyone. I know that was a team effort on the part of my other colleagues in the PO department. Just a rundown of this session. We got through 24 speeches and 58 questions. I don't know where the 25 came from. 24 speeches and 58 questions. We actually managed to pass 3 pieces of legislation, which you never see Congress do in just a short manner of 3 hours. I would like to thank the parliamentarian, the judges, as well as all the other competitors, specifically the seniors. I know for some of you, this is the last tournament of your entire congressional debate career. You have been wonderful role models. It has been a pleasure to watch you debate. So I wish you the best of luck wherever life takes you. For the judges, again, my name has been Senator Tong, William Tong, T-O-N-G. And with that, I'll turn it over to the parliamentarian.
Awesome. Before I start talking, I just want to say, I'm not sure if you guys can hear, my neighbor is like shredding a tree in the adjacent yard, so I apologize if you can hear it in the background. Anyway, thank you all very much for a wonderful round. Seriously, the caliber of competition was phenomenal. I'm blown away both with the presiding officers and with the speakers. Really, really great. You all did a really great job of engaging with the round. So there were great questions, lots of ref. Things that are usually lacking in other rounds weren't here. Obviously, it's a TOC final, so I would expect that, but still, you should all be very proud of yourselves, and it's not going to be an easy judge for sure. So thank you all very much. If anyone has any questions about anything that has to do with the round, feel free to email me. My email is kleienlek@tcd.ie. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have about the way the round ran or anything. Yeah, so best of luck to the outgoing seniors and best of luck with everything for the rest of the tournament.
Thank you. And I do have an update on awards. First off, congratulations, everybody. The official TOC awards ceremony will be a video that they post tomorrow. However, we have been given permission to have a small awards assembly just here, and we will do that at about 4:25 Eastern, which will give us a chance to get the ballots in, audit, and verify results. And we're going to try to live stream that as well, so that people will have a chance to see it. The official awards will be hosted and streamed by UK tomorrow, but we thought it would be cruel to make you wait an entire day for results. So with that in mind, congratulations, everyone, and we'll see you. Judges, please remember that you have 2 ballots to fill out. One ballot where you're going to rank the 3 presiding officer candidates, 1, 2, 3. And then your normal Congress ballot for the 12 speakers. And I will remain here in case you have any questions about the ballot. And I can just verify that, yes, in fact, it has gone into the system, because we had a few this week that the judge submitted but never clicked that final confirmation button, and it just kind of hung out in limbo. So with that in mind, competitors, we will see you in a little bit over an hour.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, judges.
Bye, y'all.